6th meeting of the Lawrence Metropolitan Planning Commission, Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. And first out of the box, this is still a hybrid meeting, so I'm going to have Becky Pepper read the rundown of that.
Thank you very much. My name is Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. Joining me here in the City Commission room is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director, and Drew Bilby, who'll be helping to facilitate the Zoom video portion of the meeting. We will work alongside the chair to facilitate the meeting proceedings. As mentioned before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you're not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to the Zoom facilitator. Unless you're participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You'll still be able to hear the meeting, and when you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to the Zoom facilitator. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distraction during the meeting. And with that, I will turn the meeting back over to the chair.
Thank you, Becky. First thing right away under general business is a request to move the agenda items, move the agenda item number 3 to first up. That would be considering the text amendment to the city smart code, doing this in order so that the applicant's representative can be with us this evening. So I move that we take number item 3 and have that first up. I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Okay, so
that's at your discretion.
Yeah.
no, I was told that it was going to be a vote.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
Never had it.
So next up, communications. Do we have any written communications to receive from the public?
All communications were included as part of your packet.
Thank you. Do we have any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
None this evening.
Do we need to receive any written action of any written action of any waiver requests or determinations made by the city engineer?
Also none this evening.
Do any commissioners need to disclose ex parte communications? Seeing none. Any declaration of abstentions from specific agenda items this evening? No, okay. Then we will go ahead and take general public comment at this time. This is for the public to come and comment on any items not on the agenda this evening. Does anybody wish to make a public comment in the room? Anybody online wish to make just a general public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to the regular agenda for this evening. And as we started with, we're going to start with item number 3, to consider a text amendment to the city's smart code. The staff presenting this request is Sandy Day.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planning Office. This item is for a text amendment to the smart code. The smart code is a set of regulations governing land use that are parallel to the land development code, but are separate from the land development code. There are some processes that are similar and overlap, and then there are others that are totally distinct and unique to the smart code. So the proposed request is to allow for a self-storage type of land use to be permitted in Transect Zone 5 or T5. We only have one of those in the community today, and that is the Proxy project that's located on 23rd Street. There are 2 components of the text amendment. They address whether or not the proposed text amendment corrects an error or an inconsistency in the development code or meets the challenge of a changing condition. And then the other evaluation criteria is whether the proposed text amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plans and the stated purpose. And actually, that is to 20-104, which is the land development code. There are some oddities in how we look at text amendments in there. The uses, the storage use is permitted in special districts. Special districts are those that would be defined uniquely to a project rather than in a specific transect zone. The land development code, the SMART code does not define land uses the way we find them in land development code, and they are specifically listed in various tables in the SMART code. And then it also looks at how those land uses function within the form of where they are placed within a particular transect zone. The T5 transect zone is most comparable to the development patterns that we see along our arterial streets, and they can have some depth to them so that you can have a mix of uses within a particular transect zone rather than having CS or CN or CC 600 and multifamily. You would have everything kind of governed in that. As staff looked at the evaluation criteria, particularly as it pertains to the inconsistency with the development code or with the challenges to changing conditions, it's really the changing conditions component that we focused on in this particular assessment. The applicant is proposing a type of self-storage that is supportive to the residential housing that you find in the proxy. It is also something that is can be converted so that if in the future there are other commercial tenants that may be more valuable to the project, that property could be converted for that ground floor commercial retail. As staff looked at it, it became clearer that this kind of self-storage use could be something that is consistent within the T5 zoning district, and staff's recommendation is to place this use as something that is by a warrant. Warrants and variances are techniques in the SMART code that allow a process to look at something that would not normally fit or fit with only certain conditions. Variances are something that go to a different body, whereas a warrant is something that is assessed at the staff level that is part of a committee. And that committee is made up of members from municipal services. It used to be public works, but municipal services and operations, fire, planning, to be able to assess those specific criteria for that particular use. Jumping around a little bit, there's a lot to unpack with the SMART code, and this may be something that will be helpful as the applicant kind of explains their perspective of what this text amendment is about, and then for staff to be able to answer questions about it. It's just not one of those things that fits neatly into our processes as we look at trying to make modifications in the SMART code, because it's such a unique piece of land use and zoning and development processes within the city. Ultimately, staff did recommend support of the proposed request, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, or let that conversation happen and be here for other questions following your conversations.
Thank you, Sandy. And before we have the applicant speak, I just want to remind everybody of the process of the applicant. Will now have 10 minutes to speak. Public comment will be 3 minutes each, and then applicant response is 5 minutes. So if the representative of the applicant, Mr. Watkins.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My name is Patrick Watkins. It's nice to see you all again tonight. I'm here on behalf of Opus Development Group. This is the group that built the 3-story building near 23rd and Osdale. It's called Proxy. It's primarily a student residential building, but as Sandy mentioned, it was designed to be a mixed-use building. And you probably have driven by it. I see some nodding heads up there, but we're here to introduce what we think is a really novel and dynamic concept. It has to be classified under storage because that's what it is. And there are some photos in your staff report about it, but it's a student-centric type of storage. It's a concept that we haven't seen here in Lawrence. It's smaller sized storage units. some you could probably classify as a locker in some respects. They're climate controlled, they're fully automated, and it's designed to be in part an amenity for the 300 beds that are in this building. Yanni Ventris is here too. He is with Opus, and I do want to make sure to recognize him, but it could be used for anything from a bike to a musical instrument to a change of wardrobe to something much bigger, but they don't get much bigger than 10 by 10. And so it's designed to accommodate some of the non-traditional students specifically in this building that don't get a lot of storage, but they might be here over a break. They might be here for an entire year without going home. We know that there's a strong market for this. We know that this concept has succeeded in other places, and we're excited to bring it here. Unfortunately, it's not allowed. It might be allowed up and down 23rd Street if you have the commercial strip zoning designation, but this is a smart code property, and technically that use table doesn't have a check mark on this particular box. So we think we're asking for a pretty minor little text amendment with regard to that. And as Sandy mentioned, it's not just an allowance, it's a warrant. It has to be discussed by the team and approved in that sense. Placing storage at this property is not optimal for anyone, including Opus. They had ambitious plans and they took major risks to get out on 23rd. They're sort of pioneers in that sense, bringing density to a part of town that hasn't seen it. And I think it's in line with our master planning documents to try and develop these areas and breathe new life. They happen to be the first one there. They want restaurants. They want dynamic, residential focused commercial space. But as soon as they started building, the pandemic hit and people stopped signing leases. They needed double drive-throughs. They needed things that this place cannot afford. Uniquely, this is an amenity for the building because it has so many residences that are designed for students. It also preserves the ability to activate the plaza area out in front of the building because this is fully automated. You would enter in from the side. It doesn't require a lot of parking, which we know this property is already stressed for, but that plaza area can still be activated for the residential tenants. They have ideas and plans for using that as a more residential focused space instead of individual bays for commercial for use. So I think still, even though this isn't optimal, it still could fit and it still works in some ways. And as Sandy mentioned, this particular type of product can be removed. It's sort of like boxes that can be fit into place, used for some time, and then removed later. And that's what we're hoping. We're hoping to get back to restaurants. We're hoping to get back to amenities that will draw more people to live at this site. But this is an interim use that we think the pandemic has largely affected and caused this particular issue. You're not likely to see much opposition to this request with regard to this property. We went through this development process a couple of years ago, and we found out that there isn't much of it. I mean, there is a neighborhood here, but it's primarily commercial uses and a couple of apartment complexes. We just didn't get much interaction. And you're not likely to have to field a lot of policy concerns. As Sandy mentioned, this is a class of one. There's no other smart code properties in the city. So if there is concern about, what does this lead to starting a text amendment when we haven't really used the smart code, it's really applying to one property. And I don't know that there's any plans for any other smart code developments, at least in the near term. So I love a good debate about policy, but it may not be totally necessary tonight. We are available for questions. We're pleased to be able to activate that first floor space, but this isn't optimal circumstances. So we appreciate your attention. We're here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're at the public comment phase. Is there any public comment on this project? We'll start with those in the room. Seeing no public comment in the room, I'll turn to online. Is there anybody wishing to speak on this item online who is on the Zoom call? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. I have a question for Sandy. And as Mr. Watkins said, this is a pretty unusual property. and it's not entirely clear to me how this text amendment would affect future applications. This may be the only property now, but would a text amendment make this use basically available by right for the T5 transect, or would it still require some, something like this process? We would have, compare it to a special use permit or something like that.
Sandy Day, Planning Office. You're right on the mark there. If the text amendment is approved, it would change the tables in, I think it's table 10 or 11 in the smart code, and allow this use to be permitted by warrant. So if thinking of it similar to a special use permit is helpful, it is along those lines. The difference is the smart code does not have special use permits the way we think of them in the land development code. A special use permit comes to this body and then on to the city commission. Within the smart code, this special use, if you will, by warrant would go to the committee for review before it would be approved. So there is still, it's not a straight staff administrative review. It's not permitted by right. We would still look at it at that committee level before it could go forward. And I just kind of double checked the code language. There are variances in the smart code, and the variances actually would go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, oddly, which is a board that's created through the land development code. What I can tell you in reviewing this text amendment and a couple other questions that have come up about the use of the smart code is that there are a number of sections in the smart code that need to be revisited. They're either out of sync with how we do things, or they just have bad references because they go back, say, to sections in the subdivision regulations that are no longer sections. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the smart code, and I would expect that we may have that conversation as we're talking about some of the other changes with the new code. So I don't envision that this text amendment is going to create a problematic situation down the line if somebody else chooses to use the smart code, is certainly not in the next 2 years.
Great, thanks very much. That's all I need.
Commissioner Retro, did you have a comment?
I was kind of going down that same path. I was thinking about it. I guess, are we talking about making an approval on a specific project? Or are we talking about making where we need to make this change? Or are we talking about a text amendment change where this project is the context to help us understand why we're making it? So is it the latter?
It is a text amendment.
Right.
So it will not be this specific to this.
And it'll enable the project.
Yes, enable the
as opposed
project.
to a specific approval on the project itself. Right. And if we looked at not transect 5 area, but what would the equivalent of that be? CS zoning? Is there an equivalent?
Staff, I believe.
Is there,
Sandy might,
based on density, but
yes, Sandy might agree on this one. There's about 5 different commercial zoning districts that would equate to a T5 zone. Among them would be probably CS, CC, CR, CD, and probably one I'm forgetting about. So if you really want to think about it, it really compresses the multitude of what you would see in the land development code into 5.
all right. So generally speaking, of that cluster of possible, I'll use the word traditional zoning categories, does this capability exist by right now in those areas in the code, or do they require a special use permit?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. This use, if somebody wanted to propose to do some type of self-storage in the smart code, they would actually have to request a district called a special district. And that is because classic self-storage would be one of those uses. I think that the smart code really says it's an outlier. It's not something that really fits within the context of traditional neighborhoods or walkable neighborhoods, that kind of thing. So it would be a special district. The most similar thing I can tell you would be in the land development code is if we had a planned development where you structure everything about that particular development in the planned development, uses, setback, density, intensity, landscaping, lighting, all of those components get built out in the planned development. That's the most comparable component to what a special district would be in the smart code, and we don't have any of those. They're really intended for kind of those developments or those areas in a community that just don't fit the definition of a T1, a T2, a T3, a T4, a T5. A T5.5 is really our downtown area, and that use is not even allowed in that district. Does that help?
I think so. I guess generally what I was trying to understand was in the land code that we have today, not smart code, but land code, is this use allowed? Would we have to go through a special use permitting process to get to this, or is it just there by right?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. That's correct. This use is a use that would be permitted in many districts by right.
Got it. All right. Thank you for that, Sandy.
Sure.
Follow-up question there, Sandy. So just to confirm, that use would be permitted in commercial strip, which is kind of predominantly around this property. Is that correct?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter?
So Sandy, what we're doing here is we're being asked to amend the smart code as a whole to allow this one building to request a warrant for this particular use. Is that correct?
Sandy Day, Planning Office, that is correct. So the text amendment has to take place and be completed before the applicant could move forward with their building application in the smart code.
But this type of warrant would then be available for anybody else in the T5 transect anytime a smart code project might be proposed in the future, right?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. Yes, it could be. Again, it would be something that would be permitted by warrant. So yes, it's permitted, but it's permitted by warrant rather than by right. Slight.
Yes, to go down the line of our vice chair, try to apply this to the normal land development code. What would be an analogy that we would do an amendment, and then what kind of, would you have to apply for a special use permit to do this?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. The type of application, the most similar application would be a site plan that staff reviews administratively. And this is really the difficulty. There's not really a way to normalize the smart code in the conventional thinking of the land development code. And so hopefully these analogies are working for you. They're kind of the best, most similar thing that we can do. The smart code really was intended and adopted to be very transformative in terms of the design product that you get out of it. There's some work to be done in the smart code, quite frankly, at a bigger scale than just this specific request. And I think the other thing about all of this is that the product that the applicant is talking about is yet even another iteration of what self-storage looks like. I was surprised as I've looked in different areas in the Kansas City area where I'm starting to see self-storage in a lot of different conventional commercial type development areas. So I don't know that the way land uses are working today, that self-storage, and particularly climate-controlled self-storage, is relegated to just those industrial outlier, away from everything, all other kind of use, if that makes some sense.
Well, that all sounds something to look at when we're updating the land development code, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around this. We only have one example of the use of the smart code. This thing was adopted in 2006. It was promoted as, smart growth and urban design and mixed use and all those types of things. And then it sat on the shelf until 2 years ago, when this is the only project that's ever made use of it. But I'm just thinking, they're coming here tonight saying that we can't lease this space the way we wanted to lease the space. While at the same time, we have condominiums and hotels and the Here apartment project that all have empty space on the bottom floor as part of our multi-use design that's been, promoted for years, that hasn't been leased since they've been opened. So are we saying, okay, this is great, we'll change it because your smart code? How long until we see somebody come and want to do a text amendment to permit this type of use in every other building that can't lease their commercial space on their ground floor? That's been there for even much longer than this building. Has anyone approached planning staff about redefining what this ground floor commercial space is in all the other buildings that have ground floor commercial space?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. I can't say that I have sat in on any pre-submittals asking either specifically about a particular property or globally doing a text amendment. I think there are definitely pieces that we probably are talking about in different groups. Jeff could probably speak to that a little bit in terms of what's going on with the rewrite of the current code. I think there's a lot of different aspects that are affecting that ground floor rental. I think we could take this conversation a lot of different ways. I'm going to stop here.
Well, that's what's happening in my head. This is going in all different directions by permitting this for one building, by amending this one code process that's been used one time that may not survive the rewrite of the land development code. Or aspects of this may be incorporated into the land development code, but I don't know where we're going with this. The other aspect, just about the smart code in general, is notice requirements. Could you tell us what notice requirements are to the public under the smart code and the opportunity for the public to have any input?
Sandy Day Planning, I do not know the notice requirements off the top of my head. I would have to look that up. So if that's something you'd like to give Jeff or I a moment to do, I don't recall exactly what that is. I'm gonna
maybe while they're doing that, Commissioner Thomas had a comment.
I'd like to hear from the guy who came up with this idea, and I guess that is you, that you saw a need for this. The building, the retail space was not being used. Where has this idea been used, and how do you see that benefiting, again, the people that not just live there, but that can use this?
Yanni Vrentis, Opus Development Company. We were approached by SmartLock, the company that provides the infrastructure for this use, and they have been targeting college campuses such as College Station, where Texas A&M is located, Texas Tech, and other Texas schools based on their headquarters. We saw it as an amenity, as Pat said, to our residents who come from further areas of the country, whether it's Chicago, Minneapolis, all spread out, where maybe they don't get home as often as kids coming from Kansas City who can go swap out their winter clothes for their warm weather clothes, or store their tuba or workout equipment, whatever that may be. And so it just gives us another advantage in terms of leasing up our residential component of our project and also serving the other apartment projects around ours. The Rockland is behind us to the south, and other smaller apartment projects.
And so it probably says someplace in here the sizes of these storage units. What?
Yeah, they're like Legos. I mean, this largest is 10 by 10, and they get down to like a high school locker size. So if we were to move forward with this, we would ask the company Smart Lock their preferred structure, which ones go quicker in terms of selling and leasing.
Well, on the whole, it seems to me that you have come up with a great plan for wasted space that is doing nothing, that should, in theory, benefit a good many people.
Yeah, and Pat touched on it a little. We would love for it to be a sports bar, or a smoothie place, or something that's a little more appealing, but this allows us to make a quick change. We haven't discussed a lease structure, but we would be looking to be able to terminate this relatively easily. And because they're like Legos and stackable, it would be a minimal process to get everything out and get a tenant in there should the market shift in our favor.
Do you want to go, David? Oh.
Well, I just want to ask if the staff has found an answer to the question at hand.
There's a lot of different notices that show up in the codes and the way it goes on, but typically what you would see in this code for something in the site planning or something equivalent to that is that code, and I won't go into the language details because it gets a little murky in there for a bit because it talks about different application types we've not brought up this evening, but it does have a 200-foot notice requirement that would be sent in applications that would be equivalent to our site planning process. So, and just as a reminder, the site planning process today has a 400-foot application window, or 400-foot notice window under today's land development code. And Sandy, feel free to add in if I'm missing one or not.
Sandy Day, planning. Jeff is right. In the most similar, well, the same process that we use for site planning would be for the applicant to send notice of the submittal of their application that it's in for review. And then if a property owner or a member of the public is aggrieved by that decision made by the committee's review or by that administrative process, then they can appeal that to the city commission, much like they would appeal a site plan determination. So it follows, actually it says in accordance with section 20-1301 Q4, which is land development code citation. So this particular code weaves itself back and forth through the land development code, and that's part of what makes this messy, trying to figure out all of the different processes. I don't have them committed to memory because, as you can see, we only have the one project that we've done through the SMART code, and it was a unique project in and of itself.
Thank you.
Answer the question? Okay.
Commissioner Carpenter, does that answer the question? There are a couple other commissioners that have.
That answers the question right now.
Okay. Commissioner Carter?
I have a question either for Mr. Watkins or Mr. Brentis. If you could, I'd like to paint a couple of scenarios. I'm wondering about like kind of the quality of life of the neighbors. One, you imagine somebody decides to store their stuff in this locker while they go visit home. While they're home, they decide to stay there to do something. Who bears responsibility for making that locker available to someone else, and what happens with the stuff? I'm
not totally familiar with that process, but it would be on the tenant in a situation, smart lock.
Okay.
I'm sure they have a procedure for abandoned lockers.
Okay. My other scenario is, sports bar materializes that's going to pay more rent than you're going to get from the smart lock contract. People have been working directly with smart lock for this service. So again, like, who bears responsibility for making these folks whole, or taking care of their stuff?
Yeah. So the customer will enter into some sort of lease with Smart Lock, and that document will cover a scenario where Smart Lock is no longer available.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say that someone else comes along and Smart Lock completely disappears, but maybe the footprint changes and along those lines.
So it'll be,
we wouldn't just pull the rug out of people.
Sure. So it'll be between Smart Lock and the.
Yes. We're simply the landlord. And they're the operating business.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner, oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Commissioner Rexford?
The pile on Charlie's comment just a little bit. I think about this in two ways. One is the question of the text amendment in and of itself with this project as the context for it, and then think about the project itself. Talk about the latter first for a moment. And maybe I'm thinking about this wrong, but to me, this is another form of mixed use. It was maybe not designed from the beginning that way, but it's another application, a service. You called it an amenity to the tenants there, but I could see that adding value to their experience, just like a sports bar or a juice or whatever the other things are. So and the fact that it's available by right where you just zoned more traditionally, I guess I don't have any problem with that as a process, or I'm sorry, as a project. When I think about the question though in front of us, the text amendment, to me that seems like we're really trying to bring more alignment to the similarities between land development code and this particular aspect of smart code. And given that it's already allowed in similar scenarios with land development code, and given that we have the additional protection should another smart code project come along, and I can't imagine why anybody would want to given this, but should another come along, it's protected by the warrant process. So personally, from all those things, with project itself, and then just the one narrow question, what we're being asked to do, I'm inclined to support that, I believe, what I've heard so far.
If other commissioners that haven't spoken yet don't have a comment, I want to touch back with Commissioner Carpenter if he has any follow-up thoughts after questions have been answered.
Well, I do have a question for Jeff. If with the update of the land development code, the smart code disappears, we would have this large non-conforming use. Would it actually be a non-conforming use, or would it be able to fit into a zoning use category under the new land development code so we don't have a non-conforming use? Because we don't want to create a non-conforming use.
There's a lot of different avenues it could run out at, depending upon which way the steering committee and the code looks at it. Could run into a nonconformity where it has a zoning district that doesn't match the T5 if the chapter 21 is decided to be shelved. That could be a situation. If 21 stays on the books, it stays just like it is as it is currently today. So I could see a scenario where maybe the steering committee and the code revises to a point where it is a nonconformity. I could also see where it stays as that position and stands. So a lot of different possibilities. Just we got a lot of unknowns with the code on chapter 20's rewrite at the moment.
Is there a possible way that we get rid of the smart code and come up with a zoning overlay or something so this would not turn into a non-conforming use, or is this hopeless?
That is a potential that's out there. It would just be a matter of understanding the base districts in the way that the code works. That's a possibility, yes.
Because I think if they become a non-conforming use, we're essentially going to be shutting them down because of the insurance requirements, especially with student housing. There's going to be a problem. But
and it all depends on how the nonconformity is written. If you look at what Chapter 20 does today, if you were legally established and continued that use, you're allowed to stay there, and it grants certain exceptions for if you need to do an addition or a change. You do have some special setbacks and coverages that come into place there, but under current code, if the property would be damaged to more than 60% of its market value, it would not be allowed to reestablish under the code. So, you know, it's hard to say where we're going with the development code since it's early days and months with it, but there's a lot of avenues out there. And it's something we're trying to keep in mind too, is not even just for this property, but for all properties, is how does that nonconformity look like as the codes evolve and change over time?
Because I know we've had discussions in the past that when we do code changes and create non-conforming use, we usually hear from people on the planning commission that are involved with banking or something else about how we've just created an issue, a potential issue for insurance, because the city has no control over those contracts. All we can do is say, yes, you're non-conforming. We're not going to shut you down under our code, but you could be shut down because you can't insure your property.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those things that could come into it, but you know, we always want to be very thoughtful with text amendments and code rewrites for that exact reason, to make sure that we're not doing a lot of those issues or trying to mitigate those as much as we can. And with a code rewrite, you're always going to run into something like that. It's just a matter of being very thoughtful and diligent about working through all the details. And like I said, I could see a couple of different scenarios. We could take that and maybe 21 doesn't stay online after 20 gets revised. I don't know where we're at yet to give a good picture on that.
Well, I mean, if you can't figure it out, I have problems with the whole smart code concept that takes it outside the normal route of coming to the planning commission, that whole public process, and making it entirely administrative with the warrant. It doesn't seem that there are as many opportunities for input with the smart code as there are with our normal process under the land development code. And I know some of that's going to change, and we're going to streamline parts of it that should be streamlined, but still keep a process in place. So this is kind of like looking at it, to me, looking at as though we're amending our comp plan or the land development code for one property without really having an understanding of what the potential impact is across the board. And that's where I struggle with this type of request, especially when we have all these other buildings with the exact same problem in my mind that don't have recourse to this right now. So there's an issue of parity here in my mind too, just what's fair.
Commissioner Broda?
Yeah, you know, I would like to just mention that considering the approving of this text amendment, there's a lot of unknowns, and many of us understand that. But I would like to point out what we know. What we know is that if this doesn't happen, that building, the floor of that building, might remain just the way it is for years, and maybe forever. It might be vacant for as long as that building will be standing. And if doing something like this, it might, we understand it might open the door for all other buildings in the same scenario to apply for the same permit. Well, if they're not using the space the way I see it, why not? If another building in the city has the same problem, that has an entire floor that is vacant, give it a purpose. It's needed. Why not? It's that something new doesn't have to be bad. If we don't try it, we don't know. If something like this brings an issue in the future, that's what we're here for. We'll deal with it. What the solutions are. Either it goes with this or remains empty. Because the way I see it, that building has no parking lot, and it's been remaining empty for a while. I drive there often, And I don't see a future for that space just because there's no parking. The only customers you might have is the one that is walking by. And opening a smoothie shop or a bar, you can try, but I don't see any customers driving there and parking 2 blocks away because we just simply don't do that. So I'm just inclined to approve this just because it's needed for that building. And if in the future something else come up, that's what we're here for, to deal with that situation. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Other thoughts, comments from commissioners?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just we're just trying to adapt. It's a new world, and I think as things come up, we're trying to help kind of find something that's workable. So I support it. Yeah.
Just make one other observation. It's just that I'm not a big fan of self-storage as a general land use in where we're trying to develop communities. I think this has a very specific purpose, though. It's oriented toward the residents of that facility. It's within the 4 walls of that facility. And so it's a residential service. And I see that proxy development as a potential anchor for a growing community. I'll disagree with Commissioner Baroda a little bit in the sense that I think if developments like that were to expand, you might actually have a lot of foot traffic going between, among residents. And, if this helps that development remain on sound footing, I think it's a good thing. And I'm sensitive to Commissioner Carpenter's observations, but I think this is, if it ends up influencing other empty first floors of commercial buildings, and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Maybe we do find this use for, within similar contexts available under redefinition of the Land Development Code. I don't know, but for now, for this development, I think it's probably a pretty good idea.
I just want to make one observation. The smart code was meant to be pedestrian friendly. That's the whole purpose of the smart code. And the very fact that you're pointing out that nobody is going to be using this smart code development because you can't walk to it is kind of an indication that there should have been a better review process than what's available to the Planning Commission when a smart code project is submitted. We're basically in an ministerial role. We're just informing the Planning Commission we're going to start a smart code project, and we say, great, thanks for telling us. We can't stop it, we can't influence it. It just goes on its way, and it's all done outside of the public eye until somebody gets a notice of a final plan and maybe knows that they can appeal it to the City Commission. That's my problem with the smart code. This building was supposed to be pedestrian friendly. They knew where they were putting it, why they were doing it, and now they're here asking to be saved, or at least part of it, so they can lease to one particular type of business. It's not about, we want to build smart code buildings and put storage in them. This is, we want to lease to one particular company because they'll pay us money for this space. So to me, that's kind of different than what we're trying to do with the Land Development Code. And the fact that it requires a warrant, that doesn't mean much to me. I mean, who gets noticed? I mean, it's going to go to the fire chief. It's going to go to, Public Works and planning staff, but nobody else is going to hear about it. So that's just my issue with the smart code. I think this is fine here. I'm not disparaging any of this. I'm just saying this whole process needs to be reviewed, really determine whether it's what we want. And I'm going to be voting no, just to kind of send that message, not to disparage what they're trying to do here. I mean, this might be just fine. This is no different than a UPS store in a strip mall, that has, you rent your mailbox someplace, and we do have a need, I guess. But, back when some of us went to college, you took what you could put in your dorm room and that's what you had. So you didn't rent extra storage space for it. So I have kind of that issue too about self-storage. Why are we putting up so much self-storage? That's where I am. And it's more an issue just with the smart code in general that I'm sure we're going to have, I hope, have some in-depth discussions about.
I am sure we will have some in-depth discussions of the smart code, but bringing it back to this particular project, I'd entertain a motion at this point.
I'm happy to do that.
All right, Commissioner Rexroad.
I move approval of text amendment TA-22-00250, Chapter 21 of the City of Lawrence Smart Code to modify uses permitted in the T5 Urban Center Transect Zone based on the findings presented in the staff report and forward that to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
Do I have a second?
Okay.
Commissioner Carter? Any further discussion? Seeing none, can we have the call for vote?
Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes?
Commissioner Barotto?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
No.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvor?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1.
Thank you. All right, now we'll return to the regular order of the agenda with agenda item number 1. That's consider approving a special use permit for the temporary emergency winter shelter. The staff presenting this proposal is Catherine Week.
Good evening, Commissioners. Catherine Week, Planning Office. As the chair has stated, I'm here to present the first item on the agenda, which was SUP 22-00300 for the emergency winter shelter, which is classified as a temporary shelter at the Lawrence Community Building, which is located at 115 West 11th Street. So the key points of this particular SUP project, the proposed use, as I mentioned, is classified as a temporary shelter. That use is permitted in the GPI district where this property resides as an accessory use. It has specific standards that are outlined in section 2544 for the accessory use, which is permitted by right. There is a limitation of individuals at 40 individuals, which would be permitted by right in that district. This particular request exceeds the standards, so it does require a special use permit for your consideration. There is an existing site plan for the site. The most recent site plan was from 1996, and that is for the existing and primary use of the Lawrence Community Building. It's noted too that there are no changes to the building, the floor plan, or the site for this particular proposal. It's a temporary emergency use that would only be operating in off hours of the primary use. So other action that would be required upon consideration of the special use permit, it does also require the approval of a resolution number 7452. That resolution was suspending the enforcement of building and certain fire codes related to this particular SUP. That resolution went before the City Commission on October 18th and did pass. It also requires, once your recommendation is made, it also requires SUP go forward for consideration at City Commission. This particular SUP, given the timing of the winter season, is scheduled to go before the City Commission on Tuesday, November 1st, and that would be via Ordinance 9943. If the City Commission were to approve it, that ordinance would also have to be approved. So there was communication on this particular item. I believe we had 2 or 3 communications. They were all attached to your packet. So there were no additional communications that came in after the packet was posted. So the summary for the proposed temporary shelter, the use, as I mentioned, is temporary in nature. It would be taking place in the gym, in the large open gym space of the community building. There would also be the use of the adjoining restroom and shower space for any individuals that would be taking shelter at that location. The SUP also includes the placement of a rented temporary storage container, and that would be placed outside the accessible entrance in the parking lot, but positioned in such a manner that it does not affect any traffic flow or parking spaces in the lot. And it would also be placed at the 10-foot required fire separation distance from the building. So the SUP does cover that location for that temporary storage container. The hours of operation for the temporary shelter would be for over the overnight hours, and those hours would be from 7 p.m. to 8 a.m. daily during the winter season, and that season is anticipated for the SUP to run from November 1st, which is next Tuesday, through March 31st, or the end of March. And again, the special use is basically raising that number from the permitted by right 40 individuals to the capacity of 75 individuals. And the reason for that increase, last year there were 2 temporary emergency shelters. One was at this location and one was at the East Lawrence Recreation Center. They're proposing just to do 1 location this year. And so there would be an increased capacity and that would need to be accommodated at this location. They're not doing the East Lawrence Recreation Center. So for any SUP application, there are 7 review criteria that are analyzed for the SUP and the appropriateness of the use. Those 7 criteria are whether or not it complies with the applicable provisions of the Land Development Code. Staff has provided an analysis in the staff report of all the standards for the GPI district, the setbacks, the lot area, any other requirements in the Land Development Code. There were a couple notations in the table that there are some nonconformities based on when the property was originally platted and approved under previous site plans. Their setbacks are not the same as they were when this building was first site planned, and the lot area is smaller than what is typically in the GPI district. Those types of nonconformities, because there are no changes at the site or the building at this time, are not required to be brought up to compliance. If for some reason the use were to expand or future development were to occur on the site, those things would need to be reevaluated and brought up to code. So in this case, the use does meet criteria number 1 in staff's opinion, and it can meet those provisions in the Land Development Code. The second is whether it's compatible with adjacent uses. One of the standards for this classification of use, the temporary shelter, is that a management or operational plan is submitted for the use. Parks and Recreation, the Housing Initiatives Division has submitted a operational and management plan, which has also been attached to the report. And that is designed to mitigate any adverse impacts to adjacent uses. And that operational plan helps to do or address those potential impacts. The third criteria, whether there's a diminution of any value to adjacent properties in the neighborhood or nearby properties in the neighborhood, staff was not presented any evidence or found any evidence that this particular use would have any adverse impact on value of neighboring properties. Again, this use is typically permitted by right. So we're not adding a use in this location. We're just, the applicant is proposing parameters outside the standards, which requires that SUP approval. The fourth criteria, that public safety, transportation and infrastructure, whether or not there's any additional impacts on those items. This particular parcel is near the downtown, at the edge of the downtown district. There's existing infrastructure, pedestrian ways, sidewalks, and utilities at this location, and the use is not proposed to add any additional demand to those infrastructure pieces. The fifth criteria, whether adequate assurances have been made that the property will be maintained and the use will not contribute to lack of maintenance on the property. Both the site plan and, if approved, an SUP are enforceable documents. So the property owner is ultimately responsible. In this case, the City of Lawrence is responsible for the maintenance of the property. Also, the operational and management plan talk about general upkeep based on the use and how that will be handled. The sixth criteria, whether there are any impacts to the natural environment. Again, this is a developed parcel in the urban center of Lawrence. And it's similar to a social service agency use. Staff did not find that there would be any potential impacts to the natural environment in this location. Criteria 7, that appropriate time limits be applied, or whether a time limit is appropriate for a special use permit application. In this case, staff does feel that a time limit is appropriate because of the nature of the use and it being for emergency sheltering purposes only. Staff did feel that it was appropriate to put a time limit on the SUP itself, and that it should only run for the given time frame that the SUP is stating, and it would expire at the end of that. And then if in the future the community deems it's necessary for an emergency shelter at this location, it should come back before the boards through the same process of review to analyze or review any changes or alterations that may need to be made. So staff did feel it is appropriate to have a specific time limit just for the duration of the emergency shelter use. And so ultimately staff did find that it met all criteria for a special use permit and is recommending approval. There are 6 conditions that are listed in the staff report, and staff would recommend approval with conditions as stated in the report. I would be happy to stand for any questions or provide any clarifications, or if there's discussion, answer those at that time if you should have them. Also, we do have Parks and Recreation staff and Housing Initiative staffs here. If you have specific questions outside of the planning piece, they can enlighten you on those pieces that they're intimately familiar with. So.
Thank you, Catherine. Seeing as the applicant is the City of Lawrence, is there any other representative of the city that would like to speak? No? Okay, then we'll move on to public comment. Is there anyone in the room who would like to comment on this particular item? Seeing none, I'll turn to online. Is there anybody online who would wish to comment on this item? I'm not seeing anybody. Am I? No? Okay, then I'm going to bring this back to the commission for discussion, please. Commissioner DeVore.
So I'm really glad that our community is doing this, and but some questions. One question is, what happens at 8 a.m.? Since the permit is from 7 p.m. to 8 a.m., I just want to know what that is going to look like. Some of the neighbors are, wondering what happens if their property is where people are hanging out. Has any thought been put into that? So that's one question. And another question is, there was a reference to if families came to the shelter with children, that they would go to an off-site location. Where is that? Those two questions.
Good evening, all of you. I am Cicely. I am with Planning and Development in the Housing Initiatives Division. So after, actually, we will start getting everybody ready to move out of the shelter, I believe around 7. This is new to me. Mitch has done this before. And then they will leave the site by 8 at the latest, probably most likely 7. After that, they will disperse as at will. I know that there's places for breakfast, and I think most of them usually head that direction. So, also your second question, remind me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, if there's families with children. Yeah.
Okay, so our families will be off-site. We're gonna contract with one of the hotels in town where they will apply for housing through one of the resource providers locally here. And then we will house for probably up to 72 hours just to let that process take place.
Yeah. Any thought given to the neighbors' concerns about last year that there were some problems? Was there any thought given to how to mitigate that?
I don't know how they dealt with that last year. Maybe Mitch knows. Mitch, or do you have anything to add? I mean, whoever staff is will escort outside. I don't know how we will keep them. Were there issues last year, I guess?
Yeah, per the public comment. Yeah.
Okay.
Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. We weren't aware of any neighborhoods complaining last year. If they did, they weren't brought to our attention. And to get back to the original question, we wake everybody up at 6 a.m. Everybody is out by 7 a.m. That gives us time to clean for the building to open. Keep in mind, all of our rec centers are year-round warming sites or cooling sites. So those individuals that are using a WES will leave in the mornings, and if they choose to stick around to when we open back up, they can come back in, but then they're following the rec center rules, which there's no laying down, there's no food, there's no sleeping. And that's how we are a warming or a cooling site year-round.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carter?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to follow up on Commissioner Doerr's observation about neighborhood problems. I was looking through the documentation. I mean, there's the rules, the facility rules that say loitering on neighboring private property is not allowed. And there are the warning of violation forms that say, why am I being given this? And an option is you've been loitering on neighboring grounds. But in the contract of service, I didn't see any language that warns people don't hang out on neighbors, in neighbors' private property. So it seems to me one possibility could be clearer communication of expectations. A second thing is from the neighbor's letter, it seemed that there was some expectation that facility staff of the senior home were, quote, chasing people away, which just doesn't seem like the right solution to this issue. It seems like communicating with neighbors that, if you've got a problem with any of our residents, let us know. Because there's no way for the facility, the people running the facility, to know that there's been a violation unless they've been informed. So, I mean, if you want to close the loop on that rule, it seems like communicating with the clients, communicating with the neighbors, for the neighbors then to communicate back to the facility would make that less of an issue.
Agreed.
Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. Yeah, I'm unfortunately unfamiliar with the letter that you're talking about, but we did not have anybody come to us last year. But I will say also, we have them sign a contract, and that should have been in the operations manual. And we can add loitering into that contract. But once they are off city property on private property of somebody else, at that point it becomes a private property owner to inform police department if necessary for trespassing. But we were unfamiliar with any instances last year with that. But we also, like I said, can add that to our contract. It's not really a contract, but they sign when they come in. And if that's not in the manual, I apologize. We can get that to you.
Super, thank you.
And this is Cicely Housing Initiatives. I'm more than happy to get with that neighborhood or those individuals that had concerns and speak with them. We've done that. That community involvement's been a huge piece of what we're working on. So I'd be more than happy to do that.
Can I jump in?
Thank you.
I think Jim maybe.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yeah, I've read through your operation plan and heard all the concerns. It seems very similar to what we heard about the drop-in center just down the street, which, just came back for a renewal of their SUP with no complaints for the 3 years it was open. So I know all these things are manageable and people get in line with the rules. I just have one question about one of the proposed conditions, which is staff is recommending a minimum of 2 workers on site while your operation plan says you prefer 3. So what's the difference between the operation plan and what's being recommended to us with the number of workers on site?
Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. That could have been a typo on my end. What we found last year, what worked best, I will say, knock on wood, I feel we had a very successful year last year. With that being said, the overnight staff is truly there sitting in the dark and the only light on is the screen of their phone. So there's 2 people sitting there. Is it better if you had 3? It's possible because they can also do laundry. They can do other things. But what we looked at originally was 3 for check-in, 2 for overnight, and 3 for check-out. Keep in mind, Cicely and I will be there every morning at alternating back and forth. And then we have hired staff, hopefully, that can do the evening check-in to get all the volunteers situated.
That answers it, because that's also the difference in your language between preferred and required. So it sounds like it's going to be fluctuating to meet the needs at the time. So that's good to know. And while we're on the issue of typos, in the management plan, paragraph 2, under training that's available, subparagraph II, desolation training, is that really de-escalation training?
Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. Yes, that would be correct. I will get that corrected. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Okay, because I'm really encouraged to see that all that training is available, because that's going to really help with anything that comes up. So thanks for doing this. Thanks for getting it organized. It's definite community need during the cold weather.
Yeah, thanks. I echo the appreciation for getting this put together, and great. We're proud of our community for doing it. I do, though, have a number of concerns about operations. And some of that, I guess, comes from two perspectives. One, a couple of you have said, hey, you haven't seen anything or heard anything from neighbors. So I just want to point you to page 36, the last page of the packet, the staff report, where the neighbor across the street articulates the concern that they had. And when I think about doubling the capacity of this shelter now. So we're talking about it tonight because we're going to double the capacity, almost go from 40 to 75. And to miss something, like this, that is a neighbor who's had an impact, and maybe others have impact and aren't able to communicate that or don't have a path to communicate that impact. I'd love to know from those of you who are operating this, what steps you can take to reach out to those that are immediately surrounding the center and make sure that we understand that what we're trying to do here is a very, very good thing, isn't somehow unintentionally spilling over as a problem to those neighbors, and that we're able to address that quickly. Let me go straight into one. I'm trying to imagine a scenario at 8 o'clock in the morning when time's up and it's wind chill of 40 below zero, which is not an uncommon thing in Kansas, and the snow's coming down. Where are 75 people going to filter out, disperse into the community? What's the plan for that? And similarly, we open the doors at 7 p.m. at night. Where do 75 people queue in that kind of weather right before the doors open up? I just like to understand a little bit more about the operational plans that you have for this.
Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. We ran into that last year. 3 mornings of the week, Jubilee Cafe opens at 7 a.m. and that's where majority of people go. They're looking at adding an additional day. And now that we're out of a lot of the COVID restrictions, individuals are going to McDonald's or they're going to Dare Center on, I believe, 1 day a week. I'd have to check the resource guide on that. But there are some individuals will stay and come back into the building, and some individuals will just proceed on to businesses downtown that are open early morning, or the library when the library opens. Those are the most of the places that a lot of the individuals go.
Okay, and go ahead.
Sorry, this is Cicely with Housing Initiatives. So with your question with neighborhoods, dealing with neighborhoods, I mean, like I said, I'm more than happy to walk around neighborhoods and knock on doors and chat with people. That's been a huge piece of our community, outreach.
There might be an opportunity just to make a one-time notification. Hey, if you've got a problem, here's who you call.
Yeah.
So they feel like they've got some recourse. Should this become a problem for them.
And one part I will say, and Mitch and Cicely have seen this quite a bit, and we have a third member of our team, Jen, who works on these issues too. They're very engaged with neighboring businesses and property owners. Here's our contact information. Here's how to reach us. If you have an issue, here's our email. So it's been something that we've kind of grown and developed in the course of standing this team up and getting the resources out there. So we're evolving and we're learning as part of it, but I can tell you from watching them work on the different projects they've worked on, they make extraordinary efforts to reach out to everybody. And if somebody wants to have a meeting or get more information, they'll go to great lengths to do it. I don't anticipate that to change with this process too.
Thanks. I hope my questions are coming off in the spirit I mean them. I'm glad that as a community we're doing this. It is a remarkable thing, though, to double the capacity inside of this facility. And I have to think that these issues of where people go, how they get to where they're going, are something that if we can maybe think those through up front, it can help improve our success. Just one last question, I think. Who is in charge of operations? Who is in charge of operating this?
It would be the Housing Initiatives Division and Planning and Development Services.
So you.
Me with a lot of help from some friends, I guess. Yeah.
It's inside of your organization.
Correct.
That actually gives me a great deal of confidence.
Correct. Housing Initiatives is one of the 6 divisions inside of Planning and Development Services.
All right, that actually gives me a great deal of confidence. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I did have one more question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I got one more question. I just need to know this. Of the 75 souls that we want to provide for here, how does that group of people overlap with or connect with those at the community shelter? Is this an entirely separate population from that? Is there some overlap there?
I will defer to Jen and Mitch and Cicely on that detail because I may not have the full scope on that.
Cicely with Housing Initiatives. So we don't regulate who is utilizing the shelter. As far as I know, people who are staying in the Lawrence Community Shelter won't stay in the winter shelter, but I can't guarantee that. Just because we don't regulate it, we're not asking where you're coming from. We're just providing that warm bed.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Just follow-up question. The shelter is first come, first serve each night. Is that correct? The community shelter?
The Lawrence Community Shelter?
Yes.
They are a private entity, so they operate through their board. I'm not sure how.
But I believe nobody has a reserved bed there. They have to leave each day and come back and hope that they can get a bed again. Is that your understanding?
I think that they have a length of time which they can stay there. They are a housing focused shelter. So their primary goal is that housing piece, which takes a little bit longer. So they do support people for longer than a nightly basis. That's my understanding of it.
I know they were supposed to, and then even longer term with the Monarch Village, it hasn't been used. But in any event, what we're talking about here tonight is really overflow capacity and for people to go when the conditions are desperate. So it's not, and the shelter is still there. So if they can't get into one, they're going to try to get in the other. And I know that you used the East Lawrence Rec Center last year, and that just the distances didn't work very well. So that one was underutilized. So I'm glad it's being consolidated this week.
Truly life-saving emergency service.
Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. Just to clarify, we never did use East Lawrence last year. We were going to use it once we hit 75 at the community building. Our highest number was 68 last year.
Oh, I thought it. Okay, I misunderstood. I knew it was available, so no one actually ever did that. Okay.
What happens if you get 100 people that need a bed?
Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. That's a good question. So currently, we're looking at the 75. We do not know what LCS is going to do this year. We also have the new support site where individuals may stay there year round. So we're going based off our numbers from last year. And that's where we're going to stick with that 75. So if we hit 75, we will have to come up with a plan B.
I mean, will that plan B happen pretty quickly? Like, meaning like, it's minus 40 outside, or I'm assuming you'll be able to react pretty quickly, right?
I would, yes. Mitch Young, Parks and Recreation. Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
One thing to kind of keep in mind as part of this, it's not really connected to this, but we're kind of going in that direction, is that the code was expanded a couple of years back to allow a variety of different uses to have temporary shelters. So other entities could stand up temporary shelters that were less than 40 to help kind of fill that surge if there was that necessary to it. Now, that doesn't guarantee somebody will do that, but there are opportunities for other entities to kind of go through that and help too in that instance.
Gotcha. There are churches in the downtown area that have done that.
Right. Any other comments? If not, I'd like to ask for a motion, please.
Be happy to. I move we approve a special use permit SUP 22-00300 for temporary shelter use at 115 West 11th Street and forwarding the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in that report.
I have a second. Commissioner Thomas? Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call for the vote.
Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Barotto?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvoir?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you. And let me check in with the commission to see if anybody needs a break before we move on to the next item.
Wouldn't mind powdering my nose.
Okay, we'll take a short break, 5-minute break, before we head to item number 2.
It's the appropriate thing to say. Yeah, of course. Room is ready.
All right. Continuing on with our evening, we now have item number 2, to consider approving a special use permit for a wireless support structure and wireless facility antenna. Staff presenting this project is Sandy Day.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planning Office, and I actually have a presentation to share with you. If you can give me just a moment to get this up on the screen. Take me just a moment. It does take just a second to get all of the things open correctly. I apologize. It's not wanting to open. Let me try this one more time.
Yes, why the volume is way down?
My volume is down, or in general?
The mic, I think the mic was, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I apologize.
You're good.
Just okay. Sandy Day Planning. I had a presentation for you. I don't know why it's not opening. So we'll just kind of go from there. I'm going to ask you to instead please refer to pages in your staff report. To start off with, this property itself is zoned IL, which is a limited industrial zoning district. It is a district that does allow for communication towers or wireless support structures, as they're referred to in the Land Development Code. This is a new structure that would be added to the community overall network. And I think the last time we looked at a cell tower in the city limits was around 2015 on Moody Road. And that particular tower was completely located in an industrial area. In this particular application, the proposed tower is located on the industrial property, but is also adjacent to residential zoning districts to the immediate east of the subject property. The Land Development Code requires communication towers to have a maximum height not to exceed 150 feet when they are in a non-residential zone, and they can only be 120 feet when they're in a residential or mixed-use zoning district. This particular communication facility would be 100 feet. One of the other requirements of the Land Development Code for a new tower is that the tower be disguised, and that can be part of an architectural component such as a steeple or a clock tower, or it can be what is proposed this evening as a monopine. So this is the first type of structure we've seen in the city of Lawrence that really meets that condition of being a disguised structure. The overall height of the structure is 100 feet. Now the pine limbs would extend a little above that overall height. Part of the application included some photo simulations of what the property would look like, and I believe those are in your packet as well. There are a number of different criteria that we look at in terms of a communication tower or wireless support structure, that being the height. There's also a requirement that there be separation. And that was one of the earlier images I just saw on the screen there that's being shared, as well as an exhibit that's in your packet that requires cell towers to be located dispersed a minimum of 1,000 feet apart. And this particular tower would be located and capture traffic along 31st Street and along the south leg of the K-10 highway. And it is quite distant from any existing communication towers. One of the other requirements of this project is that there be screening at the base of the tower. That screening is intended to screen the mechanical equipment that is located at the base of the tower, and that includes a 6-foot fence as well as additional landscaping. There is another buffer of landscaping that was a requirement of the subdivision when it was constructed. That subdivision to the east includes a vegetation planting strip along the rear property line that separates the residential use from the existing industrial use or the industrial zoning. It had originally been a manufacturing facility. It is now Peasley Tech Center, and that's part of that larger campus with the Career Institute and Boys and Girls Club immediately to the north, with additional residential uses further to the north of that even. Staff's review of the project is that it does comply with the Land Development Code requirements in terms of design standards and other components for the review criteria of a special use permit. With regard to property value, and you have several communications in your packets about that concern, the Land Development Code does not give us any guidance on how to assess that property value. The applicant did provide documentation that is included as a communication in your packet that is an assessment of property values as looked at from an appraisal standpoint, and they provided some comparables in there, I believe, from Eudora as most similar examples. And then there's also an assessment of the city's residential market in there, and we did look at that briefly, and that documentation appeared to be consistent with what staff's understanding is of the residential market for the city of Lawrence. I believe the applicant is on the line. I'm not certain, but I am happy, or they may be there in the meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Sandy. I believe Patrick Irwin is here.
I am. My name is Patrick Irwin. I am the applicant before you this evening. A few things I want to point out, as Sandy mentioned, it is a very unique structure that we're proposing. It is a monopine. It is very unique. There is none in the Lawrence area. There are several in Overland Park and in the Kansas City area as well. The property is zoned industrial. We have partnered up with Peasley Tech. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Peasley Tech, but Peasley Technical School, they offer technical skills training and in several different of the trades. Dr. Kevin Kelly is here this evening. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the school. He'll be addressing you after I speak. One of the key parts of our partnership is we will be paying Peasley Tech, obviously, rent. That rent will provide, if not hundreds of residents from low-income households, will receive preparation in life to make a livable wage over the life of the tower. The key driver of this project is to enhance the FirstNet and the AT&T service. Both have committed to occupy, to be anchor tenants on this new structure if it is approved. We've seen a significant demand in this area. service is not up to par to where it needs to be, and this will enhance that. How we got here? Well, one of the big things, first things we do whenever we look for a need to put up a new wireless facility, the first thing we want to do is see if there's any additional, any existing structures that we can utilize. Maybe it be an existing tower, maybe it's a rooftop. But in our direct search area, we did a thorough analysis. There is nothing that met the engineer's requirements. I mentioned earlier that one of the key drivers of this is FirstNet. For those of you that may not be familiar with FirstNet, the FirstNet Authority was established by Congress in 2012. It is to address public safety and communications in the event of a wide-scale disaster that may occur, and responding agencies come in from different jurisdictions descending into one community. It arose after the events of September 11th, where there was communication challenges. The Congress enacted this to address those, so there's a seamless communication between the first responders. The FirstNet system is available only to first responders. But in addition to the public safety aspect, it also will provide use for regular AT&T commercial service. One of the key points when we do our golden analysis for a special use permit, of course, we know we're going to weigh the benefits to public health and safety, which I just mentioned, and then also we're going to see if there's any diminution of neighboring property owners. We're very acute to the residents on Harper Street and how we are adjacent to the residential area. We have with us today Andrew Baker. His company performed a extensive property value impact study. The results of that are in front of you, and he's here to answer any questions you might have regarding his methodology on how he came up to his conclusion that there will be no impact to any of the property values around. Yeah, in conclusion, I believe that we have demonstrated that we've met all the criteria in the Land Development Code. We've worked pretty closely and with staff and gaining their recommendation for approval. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick.
Thank you.
Mr. Irwin, sorry. So you mentioned that Mr. Kelly might want to say a few words. Oh, there you are. Hello.
Thank you. Kevin Kelly, Dwayne Peasley Technical Training Center. When I was first approached about this communications equipment going onto our campus, I went to our board and we discussed it. And upon further research, when I became aware that this is in support of our first responders, we felt like as a part of this community, it was important that we help support those efforts in the event of an emergency or other activities. And I verified with the fire department, who we do a number of programs with, that this in fact would be part of the FirstNet system. And for us, that was an important reason to support this. The second part of it is that in our discussions with our board, that these funds would go directly to our RISE program. And RISE is Raise Income and Security Equity, and it helps provide funding for our neighbors and friends from low-income households to get training at no cost for livable wage jobs. And over the course of the life of this tower, it literally could have impact on hundreds of lives in our city. And so those are the reasons why we've gone forward with this. We actually weren't sitting around contemplating having a tower put in on our property. But in the end, our analysis was that the community benefit was great enough that we should go forward with having it.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Baker, and I was the appraiser who wrote the impact study. I just want to talk very briefly about what I did and the results of the study. So my name is Andrew Baker. I work at Valbridge Property Advisors in Overland Park, and I've been appraising since 2008, and I'm a licensed appraiser in Kansas. So what we did to figure out how this tower might impact surrounding property values was what's called a paired sales analysis. So you look at a sale of a property that's adjacent to a cell tower, and then you try to find nearly identical properties that sell very close to that. And you analyze, did it sell for the same amount? Was it higher? Was it lower? And in addition to that, we also reviewed the listing history of those sales. So how many days was it on the market? Were there multiple price cuts? And then finally, I think maybe most importantly, we talked to the brokers. We talked to 4 brokers as part of this report to see, because they're on the ground, and they talk to potential buyers about all sorts of issues or concerns they might have about a property. And so in total, we looked at 5 sales. We looked at 2 sales in Eudora. We couldn't find any sales in Lawrence, unfortunately. There weren't a lot of good sites that were really adjacent to residential properties, but we did find 2 in Eudora. We had a sale in Gardner, Kansas, and a sale in Kansas City that was next to a very large, actually the Worlds of Fun tower. If you're familiar with that, there's a very large cell tower there. And another sale in Greenwood, Missouri, which is near Lee Summit. Each of the sales sold within 30 days. Many of them had multiple offers above listing price. In fact, I think 3 of the 5 sold above the listing price. None of the 4 brokers we talked to, there was one we couldn't get a hold of, none of the 4 brokers we talked to reported any impact on value or that this was a concern of any potential buyers. And they all sold near or above their list price. So with that, the details of all the sales and how we analyze them and all the comparable sales we used is in the report. But if you guys have any questions about the report, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. All right, now we're moved to public comment. Is there anybody in the commission room this evening who would like to comment on this particular project? Yes, please.
Good evening. My name is Marty Burke. I live at 3014 Harper Street, approximately 330 feet due east of the proposed tower location. I can assure you that the value of my property is diminished to me to the point where I'm exploring other opportunities of possibilities of places to live. I found the appraisal report to be unconvincing. I agree there weren't good examples in Lawrence. The real estate market, as I'm sure you all well know, is distorted by a lack of supply. And oftentimes, by the time a property gets listed, it's already under contract. I know, I've been looking. The thing I think that is most bothersome to me, and there has been communication within residents in the area. I believe some of those communications are in your packets. Hopefully you've had a chance to review those. The people that I've communicated with strongly support the mission and the operation of Peaslee Tech. I can assure you that as an AT&T customer, I get 1 bar on my cell phone in my house. It would be nice to have a little bit better cell coverage where I live. I think that the issue that is the most troublesome is that it's my understanding that the tower has to be 100 feet inside the boundary of the parcel. It's 103 feet onto the Peaslee property, if I'm not mistaken. They put it as close to us as it could possibly be. And, we're familiar with the area. There are open spots on top of that hill. I understand that in order to site one of these towers, you have to have somebody that's willing to lease you that land on a willing basis. But there are also public parcels that are close by. They may not have the elevation of that site, but obviously towers can be made taller to compensate for that. There was an asphalt plant that was on the south side of 31st Street when the K10 work was being done that was remediated and is vacant land. I don't know who the owner of that is, but I and people that I've communicated with, although I cannot speak directly for them, would request that action on this matter be deferred and that we ask that the individuals involved look for properties that do not have as much impact on the surrounding homes. By the way, I live 330 feet away. The people across the street are much closer. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm running over.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name.
Burke.
Mr. Burke, thank you.
Yes.
Would anybody else in the room like to speak to this issue? Is anybody online that would like to comment on the item before us?
Yes, Stephen Garlow, if I could.
Yes.
All right. My name is Stephen Garlow. I live at 2808 Harper Street, about 2 blocks from the proposed tower site. I'd echo what Mr. Burke has said about neighborhood support for Peaslee Tech. It's been a great improvement on that hilltop. Peaslee Tech and the USD 497 properties, the Lawrence Career College, the Boys and Girls Club. And so I know from talking to neighbors that there's a lot of support for the beneficial use of that property. However, we have identified several concerns. First being the inadequate time for us as adversely impacted property owners, inadequate time for us to really assess all this information. The notices went out, but the community meeting wasn't held at Peaslee Tech until last Thursday. And then we had a deadline to submit comments on Monday. Mr. Irwin has been very good to provide additional information, but my understanding is there's still some outstanding information he was going to provide. One of those has to do with stormwater management. There is a history of stormwater runoff damage being caused coming off that hillside. At the south end of the property where the tower site is proposed, there is, in your packet, I'm sure you've seen the information, there's a reference to a drainage ditch. When we asked at the neighborhood meeting for more details about that, because that ditch is right along that property line behind several homes, Mr. Irwin was not able to provide much detail about the proposed stormwater management. There's problems with the stormwater runoff all along the east boundary line of the Peaslee Tech property, and it goes on to what I think is USD 497 properties. There's a damaged stormwater inlet in the northeast corner of that property. Mr. Kelly and some other folks have done some improvements over there with paving, which reduces dust, but it also speeds up the runoff of stormwater. So that's a concern of ours. Mr. Saul did some grading work over there last year, and that has helped. But we still got the damaged stormwater inlet, in addition to the questions about the south end of the property. The proposed monopine, Mr. Irwin didn't have a whole lot of information about the actual installation of the monopine. My understanding is that it would be like any other tower like that. You're going to have a large hole with lots of concrete. There's limestone, layers of limestone in that hillside as well as lots of glacial till and erratic.
Mr. Garlow?
Yes.
Yes, if you could wrap up, please.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll have
Okay.
questions.
All right. So don't know about whether there's going to be any blasting, which could damage homes. Okay. The other. So I'll stop right there. Other things I've identified in the written submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garlow. If you'll stay online, I'm sure we'll have questions. So would anybody else like to speak, online or in person, from the public? Okay, seeing no further comments, I'll bring it back to I'll actually give it over to the applicant if he would like to address any of those issues.
I would. Patrick Irwin. Once again, the first thing that stuck into my head was what Mr. Garlow said about there will be no blasting involved. We would do typical normal excavation with a drilling rig to drill the foundations. And as far as the water runoff that's been brought up, my understanding from through the application process is that the city's, Sandy, please help me, the stormwater was evaluated by the city engineer, is that correct? I don't know if that's appropriate for me to ask Sandy the question. But I believe that was part of our application, that it was addressed and it was satisfactorily resolved with our drawings. Yes, I think that'll be it.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and questions. Who would like, Commissioner DeVore?
Can we ask Sandy that question? Yeah. Sandy, stormwater question.
Sandy Day, Planning Office. Yes, the project was reviewed by the city's stormwater engineer and it was approved. I think there was some technical information we looked for. It looks like there was a miscommunication between the city stormwater engineer and myself. And that is something that I will follow up with the applicant directly. Just a little bit of documentation on the plan from the added pervious and impervious surface summary. When I saw the communication from the neighborhood about the concern of stormwater, I immediately sent that off to municipal services and operations staff. Matt Bond, the city stormwater engineer, is actually out of the office for a little bit, but he responded to that and confirmed that yes, in fact, the stormwater review was complete and it is compliant with that. The overall impervious surface added for this project is really very small compared to the overall site. It does sound as though city staff does need to go out and take a look at the drainage swale and the stormwater inlet. So that's kind of a separate thing. That's more of a property maintenance kind of question that staff is exploring. So I don't have full information on that just yet because Matt and I have not been able to talk in detail yet about that particular component, but staff will be following up on that regardless of whether this application is approved or conditionally approved or deferred.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rexroad.
Yeah, could I, for the applicant, could you talk us through your site selection process and
sure,
what caused you to choose
Peasley,
this specific location?
Yeah, so the way the process works is the FirstNet and the AT&T engineers, they issue what's called the search area, and it's a map. It's usually a coordinates with an elevation that's needed to obtain the service that they require. And the first thing we do is we find out who owns every single property in that search area, and then we pull up the land development code and we look at them and say, oh, this property won't work. It does not meet setbacks. This one will, this one will. We kind of go down the line throughout this. And this map is probably 0.2 of a mile in diameter. So it's fairly small because of the closeness, inside, because we're just within city limits. And then at that point, we find different landowners that are interested. We send some letters. We try to find most of them. And in this specific search area, we have, so Peasley is zoned limited industrial. There's a parcel just to the west on the other side of Haskell that is also limited industrial. And then just beyond that, was also inside our search area, was general industrial. And then to the south, it is limited industrial as well. The areas to the south, there is quite a bit of elevation drop over there. And one of the things that we look at is, yes, we could build a tower higher to make up for that elevation. However, we're going to have a conflict with meeting the setbacks required in the land development code. So we did reach out to many of the other landowners over in the industrial park. Some of them are at an elevation that would be suitable, and some of them outright turned us down, said they had other plans to develop their properties for other industrial uses. Others just didn't respond to us. Albeit everything I've mentioned to you is after the first thing we do, as I mentioned earlier, is we look at co-locations. So that would probably be the very first step. I went into the whole raw land looking at developing a new greenfield site.
So this particular search area, was that selected because Mr. Burke's got one bar, presumably others?
I don't think it was
for service, or is there some other factor that goes?
There's many factors that go into it. So one of the things, the engineers take into account call failures, both drops and I'm going to use some jargon, drops and blocks. When you try to make a call and it just doesn't go through.
Very familiar with
Okay.
things. Yeah.
So is this neighborhood. And one of the things, every time you do that, your phone registers it, and the carriers all keep track of that. So they know when there's failures and they keep the data. And over time, they show patterns, and it shows that there is a need for a new tower in this area. So that's how that decision is made. It is, and I'm sure they also take into account customer need and customer complaints that may have occurred. But they can pin it down to within 10 feet from where the call failure generates from.
I'll ask you just two quick questions, and then I'll step back. One question is around the noise that is on the ground or from wherever.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. Actually, be specific about that if you would. And
I would.
That might affect neighbors. And secondly, about the pine. So I'd be interested in the design life of this pole and how the pine attributes of this are managed so that they look as, I'll use the word good, as on day one.
Natural.
Yeah. Does it become a habitat like a natural pine would? So talk about that a little bit.
So yes, I will. Okay. Remind me of your first question.
About noise.
Noise, thank you. So there will be the only noise that would be emitted is if there will be an emergency backup generator at this location, especially since the emergency need for this location. It will definitely have a generator. The generators get exercised on about a monthly basis for about 15 minutes during the day. The sound emitted would be no more than what is emitted from an air conditioner from a normal commercial facility. In addition to that, we do have the screening going around it, both the wooden fence and the shrubs going around it. I think that would also shield some of that noise as well, both auditorily and visually. So I think, and that's the only sound that would be emitted. I mean, we have during the 4 to 6 weeks during the construction period phase, of course, there's going to be noise during that time. That will all take place during normal business hours. As far as the monopine goes, the land development code requires the tower to be disguised. And this area lends itself to that. in that the buffer area that Sandy referred to that is on the east that was required when the neighborhood on Harper Street was built, there was a buffer that was required as part of that. And in that buffer, there are mature pine trees, albeit not the height that we are installing at, but there are pine trees in this area, and there are some pine trees on the Peasley property as well. As far as when you say like habitation, you're referring to like wildlife nesting in there. I can tell you with all structures that are vertical, if it's, I'm sure pine trees as well, or monopines as well, but I know with cell towers, it is a major issue with nesting, and there are a lot of federal regulations regarding when work can be done on cell towers, typically mandated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, that they don't want to disturb nesting seasons. So to answer your question directly, I think there's a high probability that nesting would occur on this structure.
But not desirable.
Not desirable.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? So given that it's on a hill, does it need to be 100 feet high? Is there any?
Yes, it does. And so that is the base, that's where we need to be. And if we were to go down lower, further to the south, I believe the area that Mr. Burke was referring to is owned by we did look at the asphalt plant, where the asphalt plant used to be. That is owned by KDOT. And it would need to be, I think the elevation difference is between 40 and 50 feet of elevation. So it'd be quite a bit taller. And once we get into those heights, we might not even be able to be a monopole tower. It might have to be a self-supporting tower to get those kind of heights needed. A three-legged lattice, kind of what is on, I believe that's what's on Moody that Sandy was referring to, the last tower that was built in the industrial park.
Thank you. Commissioner Carter.
Yeah, thank you. I have a follow-up question about, site planning. Looking at an elevation map of the site, it does seem like there are alternative locations at roughly the same elevation. There's a stand of trees directly to the west that, it's regrettable to lose trees, but it's twice as far from the residences, as well as to the north of the northwest of Peasley Tech. There are, of course, it's closer to the College and Career Center, but can you talk through about why that particular site that almost predictably is going to aggravate the neighbors?
Well, and so what I can tell you is we got it as close to the trees as we could. We didn't want to take out any trees. There are restrictions that we have. And certain times of the year, like I mentioned, we can't take trees down. So we want to avoid that. And plus it would be also, we wanted to kind of blend in, not only we're absolutely concerned about the folks on Harper, but we're also concerned about people going down Haskell and down 31st Street and what they see. And so they're going to also see, we're taking their visual account in as well. And I think it blends in better if there's a stand of trees versus us taking out all the trees and put one big structure in the middle. There are other locations on the Peasley property that could work. Setbacks would be a challenge, especially to the west. Mr. Burke, we had a meeting. I met with Mr. Burke last week, so I've already am aware of some of his challenges or his questions that he had. And one of them was, what about the area to the west of Peasley where the parking lots, where the trees are? We looked at that. There is a large swell, a natural water runoff that goes down there. I think if we could, you can construct anything, of course, with enough money, but I think that would exasperate any stormwater runoff issues that it sounds like we're already having at this area. This area was already no trees, level. It seemed, it checked all the boxes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
And my question was along the same line that Mr. Burke mentioned. Why 103 feet rather than 105 feet or 10 feet? That's the same
Yeah.
that I think Mr. Carter was getting at.
We could move it over. I don't even think 20 feet would really matter that much different. As far as the visual aspect of it goes, it seems very negligible, but we would be, we have flexibility to move it over a little bit inside the compound. We possibly could do that. But we'd like to be in that same general area so we don't have to go through the whole, if we move it more than, I think 20 feet is the threshold. If we move it more than that, it would trigger all new regulatory filings and it'd be very burdensome at this point in the game. We saw the code and we made sure that our surveyor and our design engineers meet it. And we have, as you can see from the documentation provided. If the threshold needs to be 110, I would do that too. I'd make it 110, but I'm just being very honest with you.
I don't know if this is a question for staff or the applicant. I'm trying to just think about the height of this. There is some kind of tower, telecommunications tower. I'm not sure what kind it is, near the nest when you're driving down, when you're going on the bypass. How tall is that? I'm just trying to get a sense. Does anybody know?
Give me a couple minutes and I might be able to get that.
Just trying to get a comparison here. So a standard telephone pole, just to get it, is like about 40 feet. If I'm thinking about
a wooden pole?
The wooden poles that are along in that buffer area. Down there, there's about 40 feet. Okay, so your typical wooden pole. And one of the, speaking of vegetation, in terms of moving it, I've been on that site. And there's some really nice native vegetation in that little plot there. So I'm kind of sad if this goes forward that vegetation would go away. But I did look, it was nice enough an area that I checked the historical aerial photography in that area, and it has been disturbed in the past. So I can't say it's a remnant or anything, but it's fairly nice. Those woods there, I don't recall being anything particularly special, but they did slope down through those woods.
Quite a bit.
Just if you go just a little bit into those woods, it sloped. But if that were a possibility, I don't know if that would make any difference given the height.
And you're saying to
move it, if you moved it west.
Moved it to the west. I would have to talk with Peasley and make sure that they would be okay with that.
Commissioner Ashworth, are you referencing a power pole or is it a tower?
It's a very tall tower. Maybe it has satellite dishes on it or something. It's right in the southwest edge of the nest. And I actually saw it when I was driving there this morning when I went to go look.
That's in there.
Yeah, okay.
Stand out.
That's okay. I was just, it's okay. I was just wondering because that was
on the screen. Just give me 1 second to measure.
In terms of the buffer area, I just have a quick question. The buffer is there any way that the buffer yard that is there can be enhanced in any way? That's not going to take away from the tall, a tall monopole, but in terms of screening from the base, I did notice when I was on site that the buffer yard is getting a little thin in places. I don't know, this is a question maybe for Sandy in terms of how that might be enhanced if it does continue to thin with vegetation dying in that buffer yard.
Sandy Day, Planning Office. So the buffer yard was something that was set aside, land area that was set aside on the private property side, on the residential side. Okay. And at the south end, toward the southern end of the cul-de-sac, that's where you see the green space behind Beasley. As you continue to the north, there is an access drive that goes around the east side of the Peasley building that comes very near to the property line. So landscaping could be added, trees and vegetation could be added on the Peasley property south of that drive. But there's not a lot of room on the Peasley property to add it where that access drive goes. Now, could additional landscaping be added on the residential properties? Perhaps. That's also where part of that swale falls. So we would want to be careful about the placement of vegetation as it goes to that swale. The other thing I was going to mention, I couldn't quite find the height of that particular tower that you referenced, but the one that is in front of what used to be the Knights of Columbus building, which is now, I think, Anderson Rental on 23rd Street, that structure is about 160 feet tall.
And the one that you were referencing is 150 feet tall per the site plan.
Okay, thank you.
How about the one on campus? That's over 600 feet tall.
Oh, the Kansas Public Radio transmitter?
Isn't that like 803 feet?
It's a lot taller, but I will measure and find out real quick.
Well, I remember looking at it when wind power came up and
Sandy Day planning. I will share that the couple of towers that we have been looking at in the last several years have been in the 120 to 150 range when we're looking at communication towers. And the property that we were talking about that is owned by KDOT, basically on the south side of 31st Street, that is actually property that is in the county. So whether or not the applicant could have or some other carrier could work with KDOT to place a structure there, that would be a fairly involved process, just getting through the state. I don't know if that would be land acquisition. I don't know how that would actually work out.
Sandy, what height triggers the need for a light on the top?
Sandy Day planning staff, I believe FAA requires lighting towers to be lit at 200 feet.
Follow-up question to that. Is there going to be any visible light to the neighbors, whether it's the base? I know you guys have asked for a study. Do we know?
We do know. There will be no lights visible. Correct.
I'd like to ask either Mr. Garlow or Mr. Burke in terms of, we've heard about some stormwater issues, but I'm wondering just your thoughts on the aesthetic nature of the pine, having it be a monopine. There are many, many different kinds of models for these, these types of poles. And we've heard the reason for the selection of the pine. But do you have any comments on the aesthetics of the pine form?
I might mention that I have a background in parks and recreation management, a degree in wildlife biology, and I am familiar with flora and fauna in the state. Eastern red cedar, which are some of the trees over there, is the only native evergreen tree in Kansas. Everything else is planted. I actually have seen one of these towers that it was around pine trees. And I've looked at the pictures that were provided by the applicant, and I don't think it's going to make it much less unsightly. The plantings that they're putting around the base will never be visible, to the residential area. And I don't know that the extra, of course, I guess it's your code that requires that, but it doesn't diminish the intrusiveness of the tower from my perspective. I'll let Mr. Garlow address that if he wishes.
Thank you.
Well, before you go, since you do have the background, what's the maximum height of the native trees, the evergreen trees in this area?
Well, I'm going to go by estimate because I don't have that encyclopedia. I could Google it, but there are very old eastern red cedars behind our house on the Mary's Lake property, and I would guess them to maybe be 30, 35 feet tall.
How tall?
30, 35 feet, but these are trees that have been there for many, many decades. It's a slow-growing tree.
Thanks. Yeah, I saw one of these driving through South Dakota, and it just stuck out like a sore thumb in the pine forest because it just didn't match anything.
Yeah, this is Stephen Garlow. I would just echo those comments. The viewscape will be altered for as long as that tower is there. If you like Mary's Lake, like all of us who live in that neighborhood do, you walk over to the bridge and then you look back to the west, there will be a large monopine just sticking up and altering and marring the sunset photos. There's a lot of photography goes on around there. So that will be altered with the installation of a tower like this.
Thank you. Questions and concerns more from the commissioners? Do we have an idea of what we're thinking about this project yet?
From what I can tell, the major concerns were the sound, and it sounds like there won't be sound except once a month. The light, it sounds like there's no light. Stormwater seems like there's an issue, but the issue predates this construction, and the city is looking into it. So from what I can tell, most of the concerns, there are aesthetic concerns, but the other concerns seem to be addressed today. So that's my take. I would support it.
Other thoughts?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I'm not convinced that the proposed site here on this particular parcel of property is the least offensive means of doing this, but I also recognize that it's seems to be well within code requirements. And, if we're being told that in good faith that there aren't other appropriate means of doing it on this site, I think I would cautiously be supportive of this application.
Mr. Rexroad, did you?
Yeah, I'm not ignoring or insensitive to the concern of the neighbors. Those last round of comments, once this is there, it's there, and it will change the horizon, looking west. At the same time, also recognize that this site does provide what's required for this technology to be installed. It meets code. The developer, the applicant, has done all the work to make sure that they've met all of those code requirements. And thinking about the additional and probably fairly rare benefit of future contribution to our community through just the happy coincidence that you can support Peasley at the same time as this. I think all those things together, while I am sympathetic to the neighbors, I do lean towards support of this.
Commissioner Carter.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about the aesthetics of it. I think even code doesn't cover the fact that it's almost impossible to adequately and appropriately disguise something of this height. We don't have any natural features in this part of the country that authentically resemble a 100-foot tall cell tower. But I would agree with Commissioner Rexroad on the benefit to Peaslee. I would encourage the applicant to try to move the site as far west as possible without triggering another, site plan review. That would be my one request.
I could just jump in on Commissioner Carter's comments. Looking around at the site, if Peaslee, that whole section there has been the only property willing to do this. I know there's severe site restrictions on the west because of the slope. And if I look at the northwest corner, which was mentioned, I mean, that's actually affecting more properties, putting it in that northwest corner there. So while I have to, the 100-foot tall fake pine is certainly wouldn't be in my realm of aesthetically pleasing landscaping. They have done the due diligence of screening it below. There's no lighting. There's relatively little noise. It meets code. So I think I might have to go with an approval on that one as well.
We live in an age that we are caught up in things that we think we have to do. At least we have to have cell phones, we have to have these towers, they're going to be someplace. I think a benefit for Peaslee, which is a wonderful addition for people, that it can benefit hundreds of people over time. That is one of the things I like. I appreciate your sincerity in saying, look, we're going to do whatever we can within the parameters that we have. And if you can move it 20 feet, I would say so be it. If you get out of that and you have to do another whole rigmarole, well, what's that going to move it another 5 feet or 10 or whatever? I think we're just caught in a situation. We're going to have towers. It is unfortunate for the people on Harper that, yes, it is forever going to change their view. And on balance, I'm going to say yes, I will vote for this tower. And again, in part based upon your sincerity, the work you've done, and the good that it can do.
My only question is, does it have to be disguised as a tree? Just a monopole will disappear from our viewscape faster than a fake 100-foot tree will. That's going to be, we could sell tickets and say, come to Lawrence and see the tallest fake tree in the state. But, I know it's in the code, but do we have to have it disguised as a tree? Because I think that's what I find the most objectionable about this whole thing. That and the fact that we've been making a lot of noise about this is zoned IL when these towers are permitted in every single zoning district that we have. It's not just IL, so they could go anywhere if you have the fall distances and meet these other requirements. So there's nothing special about IL district for these. But back to my question, do we have to disguise it as a tree? Because you don't even see the one on KU campus anymore. I mean, it's just there. And the thing is huge.
Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding of the code is, yes, it has to be disguised in some manner to meet the code. Otherwise, it would require a Board of Zoning Appeals variance to be a non-disguised tower of some sort.
How about paint it blue and white, so it disappears into the sky. Is that camouflage?
Yeah.
Sandy Day Planning Office. Yes, the code specifically requires it to be disguised, and it can be disguised, as a tree as we've seen, or as some other architectural feature. The painting of the structure, of if this were a monopole, and to paint it blue or white or gray, so that those tones or those colors ultimately blend into the sky view of it, is not code compliant. And that was an option that we talked with the applicant about, because the application as submitted initially was as a monopole, which was not compliant with land development code design standards and would have required a variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And then the question is not only process, but can they meet the tests of hardship that would be required for a variance as an appeal?
Oh, Lord, not the hardship thing again.
Okay. Well, yeah, I spent some time looking this afternoon at other pictures. There's deciduous tree models. There's water tower models. There's
Cactus.
well, no, heavens no.
I love your idea of painting. I'd love to see them go to the BZA and see if they can pull that off. Probably be cheaper too.
That's not an undue hardship, but prevents use of the property, so it won't get through.
Maybe there's
BZA can do anything they want to do.
Yeah.
They can make any decision that they want to make.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation.
But anyway, not relevant for tonight.
No, no. Mhm. So you're asking if there's any flexibility on, does it have to be a pine tree? So is there any flexibility on the design of that,
Pirate
Mr.
flag
Irwin?
top. And we have a flag, we have a flagpole one now, but
So the pine tree is the best alternative. And Sandy, you did say that painting it does not meet the requirement, correct? It does not. Correct. Okay. Okay. So I didn't think it did. Otherwise, that would have been the best alternative in this situation. A flagpole structure is something that's been done in the past. However, technology has advanced in a way that they're not feasible at this point. Due to new emerging technologies, radios are mounted at the base of behind the antennas, whereas they used to be on the ground. Now they're mounted up top, and they cannot get the radios to fit inside the poles now. And so that's the reason why that wouldn't work. And that's why we're at the pine tree as our best alternative here.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Carter. Thanks.
I guess returning to the conversation about relocating as far west as possible. I guess my question first of all, is that something you would find amenable?
I would.
Okay. Second question for staff is, in order to get that in writing, would we need to make that a condition, or is that just something we would make as a request to the applicant?
Sandy Day Planning Office. You could do that either way. You can leave it flexible for the applicant to try to do that, or if you'd like to make it a more substantial requirement, then I would encourage you to add it as a condition of approval.
Would you consider
that condition then could be subject to the review by staff? I mean, feasibility is going to come into play there. So if we just say you must move it 20 feet, that's kind of an unreasonable condition. So we have to leave some review process.
Which is move it as far west as feasible within the current application.
Yeah.
Here to make a motion with that condition?
Okay, I will try. Let's see. I'd make a motion to recommend approval of a special use permit for a wireless support structure and wireless facility at 2920 Haskell Avenue. and forwarding the request to the City Commission with a recommendation of approval subject to the single condition outlined in the staff report, as well as the additional condition that the tower be relocated as far west as feasible within the limits of the existing application. Jeff and Sandy, is that reasonable language?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Second.
Any further discussion? First and second. I guess we'll have a call of the vote then.
Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Barroto?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvoir?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexrod?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you all. And thank you, Mr. Burke, Mr. Garlow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Mr. Kelly, thank you for all coming out this evening. Okay, item 3 we've already dealt with earlier this evening. So we are on to item number 4, which is to consider approving a text amendment to the Land Development Code as it relates to accessory bar use. The staff planner for this item is Kyle Kopig.
Good evening, Commissioners. Ellie Mullins, Planning and Development. I will be presenting this, but Kyle is also there. So the item before you tonight is an amendment to Articles 5 and 17 of the Land Development Code, expanding the definition of accessory bar to add 2 additional principal uses, fast order food and hotel motel extended stay. The Planning Commission initiated a text amendment on July 27th to clarify the principal uses permitted to have an accessory bar as an accessory use. The intent is to help apply the code consistently by bringing clarity and conformity to the definition. So in 2021, a previous text amendment, TA 21-00094, added multiple additional uses beyond eating and drinking establishments to the list of principal uses permitting an accessory bar. These included indoor participant sports and recreation, personal convenience services, personal improvement services, and multiple use retail use categories. Fast order food and hotel motel extended stay were 2 other identified common uses seen with accessory bars that were overlooked in the original amendment. Additionally, the code references alcohol sales and accessory bars related to these 2 uses, but doesn't include them in its principal uses permitted to have an accessory bar. Beyond the addition of 2 principal uses, other minor text changes are proposed to clarify or correct language relating to accessory bars in Article 5. The use regulations for accessory bars still solely talk about eating and drinking establishments when the definition was expanded to include uses beyond these last year. This has been updated kind of to a more general principal use. Detailed proposed code language was included in your agenda packet. While the proposed amendment is mainly to correct these errors, clarify process, and accommodate existing conditions in our community, it also provides opportunities for businesses to diversify their offerings to remain competitive in a changing economy. As well, multiple goals in Plan 2040 are furthered by the addition of the principal uses to the definition. You can find a full list in your agenda packet, but they are generally related to the ability to diversify and adapt to the economy. These changes to the code meet the criteria of correcting an error or inconsistency in the development code, meeting the challenge of a changing condition, and establishing consistency with the comprehensive plan and stated purpose of the code. Staff recommends the Planning Commission forward the proposed amendment to the Lawrence City Commission with a recommendation for approval. I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ellie. So at this point, we don't have any applicant to comment. on this because it's a change in the code presented by staff. Any public comment on this item? Any public comment in the room? Seeing none. Any public comment online? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Questions? Commissioner DeVore.
What is an example of fast order food? Like what?
The example that we've kind of brought up the most is like Chipotle. So there can be sit down service, or not service, but there can be like an area to sit down, but it's mainly like a place you go in, get your food, can eat it there or take it. A little bit different that there isn't kind of that, like a waitress waiting on you or something like that.
I see.
I think it's also important to note that there's a differential in the code between fast order food and fast order food with a drive-through. And so there is a differential in the way that that reacts and behaves that sometimes pops up in our use tables. Just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
This fast order food with drive-in would not be included in this, correct?
It would not.
All right, gotcha.
So with this, if you could get beer at Chipotle, for example.
Yeah, that's kind of the intent. We've seen a lot of changes in the state laws and the way that the businesses are operating. So it kind of matches with what we're seeing. That was the intent when we did the first amendment to kind of mesh that all together, but we just didn't get all the loose ends tied up.
Gotcha. How do you prevent someone from walking out of Chipotle with a bottle of beer? You know what I mean? Like.
There's state laws that do prohibit that. And I will tell you from seeing people having gone that route is the staff usually gets very quickly to jump in and intercede in those instances. But if you do see instances like sidewalk dining and some of those other things, there are allowances to allow that to occur too. So there's some kind of give and take in those realms.
Gotcha.
Other questions? Concerns? This is mostly
Is there a reason not to do this?
Mostly a cleanup item.
Yeah.
That's okay. Can I have a motion then?
Could I just ask a question? Are we making motions separately for each of these two items, item 4 and item 5?
Oh, yes, they are different.
Okay.
Yes.
Commissioner Carter, could you clarify that question? I'm not sure I follow.
I'm looking at, give me one moment. Oh, I think, yeah, I was looking at item, never mind. This is obvious. I answered my own question. I'd be happy to make a motion. I move that we forward the proposed amendment to the City of Lawrence Code, Chapter 20, Article 5, Use Regulations, and Chapter 20, Article 17, Definitions regarding principal uses that permit an accessory bar use to the Lawrence City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
I have a second.
Second.
Retro, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, you can have a call vote, please.
Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Barotto?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvoir?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
All right, thank you. On to item number 5, our last item this evening, to consider approving a text amendment to Chapter 20 of the Lawrence Land Development Code pertaining to eating and drinking establishments. Kyle Kobe is our planner for this item.
Thank you very much. I'm Kyle Kobe with Planning. Text amendment before you tonight pertains to Section 20-509 of the Land Development Code, which are the standards pertaining to eating and drinking establishments. More particularly, the code section proposed for modifications is Section 20-5095, standards that apply in the CD district. The recommended changes before you tonight differ somewhat from those proposed by the applicant. The reason for that has to do with the particulars of the existing alcohol regulations within the CD district. The changes initially proposed by the applicant pertain to Section 20-5092 accessory bar standards. As you've seen in the staff report, there were several reasons why staff is recommending the changes to the CD district standards rather than the accessory bar standards. The primary intent of the change is to address the central issue at hand for the applicant, The application was submitted by a business located in downtown Lawrence. So if a change were made to the accessory bar standards, it would still leave the CD district regulation restrictions in place and would not address the true intent of the applicant. The reason for all this is that the CD district standards regulate licensed premise uses licensed premises rather than specific uses. In other words, the CD district standards regulate the sale of alcohol in general, regardless of the use at hand at any given location. The standard in question is the existing section 20-5095I. It states, the licensed premises use in CD shall be required to derive from the sales of alcoholic beverages not more than 45% of its total gross sales receipts during the calendar year. In other words, unless the business is one of the existing grandfathered locations, any establishment wishing to sell alcohol may not do so if those sales exceed 45% of its total sales. So in order for the text amendment to address the intent of the applicant's request, the change to this standard would be necessary. The accessory bar standards state that if at any time the sale of alcoholic beverages exceeds 55%, then the bar will be deemed the principal use. The applicant's initial request was to allow for a modification of this standard to allow a reduction from 55% sales to 10% sales. In other words, to allow for an accessory bar to constitute 90% of the total sales. So when converting this request over to the CD district standards, since the existing standards state not more than 45% of total sales may be from alcohol, that number was flipped from 10% to 90%. Several conditions are recommended if such a reduction of the standards were to take place. The primary condition is the requirement for requests of this type to be made via a special use permit. Special use permits require public notice as well as hearings at both the Planning Commission and City Commission. This route would ensure that a transparent public process took place, would bring in the same criteria for review as any other special use permit, and allow for additional conditions or restrictions to be applied to any given use. The second condition is that the gross floor area of the use is less than 3,000 square feet. This is intended to ensure that large-scale bars or nightclubs would not be able to seek a reduction to the alcohol sales standards. Other restrictions recommended at this time are that the business obtains and maintains a valid liquor license, as well as any other restrictions placed upon the special use permit during that review and approval process. Staff is recommending approval of the text amendment for the reasons outlined in your staff report. Given that the proposed changes would still retain the existing standards by default, they would only apply to smaller scale uses and require a special use permit application. Staff feels that approval of this change would allow for a way for businesses to seek approval of a modification to these standards in specific instances without fundamentally reworking the standards overall and in such a way as not to significantly impact the existing character of downtown Lawrence. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm certainly able to help answer any questions. I believe the applicant is present in the room.
Yes.
So,
You have, if you could state your name, or one of the two.
My name is Dante Colombo, and I want to start by thanking you all for your time, of course, and I'll get into that even more. Yes, my name is Dante Colombo, and I am the managing partner of the applicant in question, John Brown's Underground, just a few blocks away. With the full understanding that this is at its core a question of policy, I did want to real quick say a few words about the why of this proposal and what it means to myself and my colleagues and our peers downtown and elsewhere in our general area. And first and foremost, I do want to recognize that the only reason that I'm able to be here tonight and speak to you all about this is because of the thought and care and very, very hard work that Kyle and planning staff and his colleagues in the planning department and yourselves have put toward bringing this proposal to this point. I truly cannot possibly express my gratitude for like your time and your consideration in that. In the time since Section 2509 was originally passed, municipalities across the country have of course seen a rise in small, experience-focused drinking establishments like ourselves and like Bourgeois Pig, Henry's Upstairs, others in town that exist under grandfathered and not grandfathered licenses. We are extremely proud at John Brown's Underground specifically to have represented Lawrence in multiple national publications, and like our peers locally and regionally, to have created something of a destination, we believe, for folks across the country who share our interests in cocktails and spirits with integrity, or simply just having a good time with friends and family, in a setting much different than a sports bar or a nightclub or a college bar that exists often like throughout Lawrence. In submitting this proposal, we hope that we and others who would qualify might have the opportunity to continue doing what we do best in the city that we love, in the downtown district that we love so much. We feel that this variance would update and strengthen the intent of Section 2509 while allowing establishments like ours to continue doing what they do best, which is contribute positively, we believe, to the attraction and the integrity of a night out in downtown Lawrence. Again, thank you all very much for your time and consideration. I'm, of course, happy to answer any questions and provide more context or all those good things. So, and again, thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Well, let's open this up for public comment. I don't see anybody else in the room to make public comment. Is there anybody online that wishes to make comment? Have a comment for this item? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion then. Commissioner Carter.
That's fine, thank you. I have a question for staff. It's not so much for the applicant. I understand the applicant's specific interest in his establishment. But I'm curious, CD district, that's downtown. I'm curious if there is a distinguishing characteristic that makes us want to apply this exclusively to eating and drinking establishments downtown and not elsewhere in the city.
It really revolves around the limitation on alcohol sales that's embedded in the land development code that only applies to the CD district. So there are similar conditional zoning elements that are in the city for other locations, probably most notably is 8th and Penn that has this applied via conditional zoning, but it would only be because of the downtown's restriction that is embedded in the land development code.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas,
I don't see it in front of me now. I was incredibly impressed by the letter and the explanation. I've never been to the place, but I thought you made such a quality argument for changing this that it was hard for me to think anything other than, wow, that seems like such a reasonable request, and just the genuineness of the writing. So unless there could be many things that I miss, I thought it was a terrific presentation that you did.
Don't want to overlook Commissioner Munch there. Sorry if I do occasionally miss you. Just yell out as you've been doing.
A question for, I'm not sure who to ask. Does the police department have an opinion on this?
No.
I wonder.
Sorry, which department?
The police department.
Kyle can correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't believe they've weighed in on this particular amendment since it's really a licensing function of the city clerk's office. That's who we've worked mostly with on that one. Any of the laws that the police would be enforcing would not be modified or adjusted as part of this. And
some of the concern, I asked that, some of the concern that you'll hear when you say this is that it could open the door to a change in the nature of downtown. It's oftentimes referenced to Aggieville. A change in the nature of downtown. So one of the things that jumps to my mind is, well, the people who would be responsible for maintaining that, do they have an opinion? But I also would like to ask you, Dante, how you would answer those concerns, the people who think, like, I love Mass, I don't want to live in Aggieville.
Absolutely, yeah. So a few things on that front. Insofar as the concerns that police might have or the police department might have, part of the original application that we submitted for this purpose included a covenant that would require any applicant for this proposal to able to demonstrate that they were not contributing negatively to the environment of downtown Lawrence. And so we had like sort of like qualified that with without like can the applicant demonstrate that they have not been like part of any MIP violations or have had any other like police related complaints or arrests or inappropriate serving of alcohol. And that was part of the like initial sort of like set of requirements that we listed. Those were revised and Kyle gave some really good reasons for not including those in what you're reading tonight. But I certainly share those concerns as well, and I think that's the biggest part of all this is that we do truly and strongly believe in like what the original code was intended to do, which was to keep masks from becoming a free for all more or less, and so we certainly don't want that. But like at the time the law was written, again, there just was not an understanding nationally even of this kind of place. It didn't exist yet, right? So like this is just to kind of allow for it to exist in downtown Lawrence and to like, with very specific and careful covenants have like, that be a possibility more or less. But I certainly share those concerns as well. And I would say that, it's funny that we find that by and large, the places that oftentimes are issues with regard to policing and with regard to those violations I mentioned before are either grandfathered in or not part of the CD district in general. And in fact, by like, sort of accident, the majority of the folks that end up, kind of having to like, not be a victim of the law, but for lack of a better word, victim of the law, are places that that are not doing those kinds of things, that are not creating that kind of environment. And that's not to like speak ill on anybody, of course, but I think it's worth noting that it does seem to disproportionately affect those kind of like these kind of smaller bars, and that's kind of why the square footage requirement was included in there. We believe that if you're under 3,000 square feet, it's far less likely that you can become a continual source of public nuisance in many ways. So at least as far as we can measure. Yeah.
Thank you for that very much. Thank you. Go ahead.
I remember one of the people that came and applied for the tin building down here. I forget what they called it.
Yep.
The Quonset. And the guy who came and spoke made an impact on me. He said, there are lots of ways to fudge this alcohol thing. Let's see. We're taking the limes and charging those differently, and we're taking the napkins, and and he said there are many, many ways to do it. And he said they didn't want to do it. And the struggle that you went through with trying to get food and who would provide the food and the kitchen, because it has to be done on an individual basis, people that apply for this. This is not a blanket for everybody. It has to be. And I think for us to sit and look at individuals like you and the establishment, I think gives us a lot of leeway on, at least for me, on approving this and at least believing that you were being honest in your presentation.
I'm going to push back a little bit just for the sake of argument here. So certainly moving this particular modification and placing it in the regulations applying to the CD district makes sense, as staff has recommended. But I guess what I'm wondering is that the change so that limits it to 3,000 feet so as to maintain the character of downtown. I'm thinking down the line that just thinking about the smaller businesses, retail outlets that are in downtown that are less than 3,000 square feet, what is the chance of those turning over, to become a series of small bars along Massachusetts Street in the downtown area? Just because this one place might not change the character of downtown right now as it stands now, given what's there. But if this becomes an incentive to replace smaller retail outlets, that are struggling. That's my concern.
Chair, that's exactly what the line of argument was of downtown Lawrence, which resulted in this initial regulation. The fear that retail would turn into bars up and down Massachusetts. And what really surprises me is there's zero input here from downtown Lawrence. There's nothing from the chamber. And when this was discussed at the first time, it was, the city commission meeting for that was pretty lively with individuals from all those organizations. And here we are now with no public input, period. I have to wonder what's going on. Have we changed so much? Have we given up on downtown? Or have we just decided we can just, we're letting bars go into retail up and down the street? I mean, they can have little accessory bars. We had one of those for some of our bike shop and others, and now, smaller bars that don't have to meet these requirements. And I know that the city commission is expressed, maybe we should revisit and get rid of these regulations too, but where's the public input, one way or the other? I just don't understand that. Because this has been such a hot topic, and it's put places out of business in the past. Brown Bear Brewery came into town and couldn't meet the food requirement and had to leave. I mean, we've had lots of businesses that have not made it because of this, but now nobody.
To answer your point specifically, the question about the 3,000 foot and what's to stop the transformation of smaller business, I think about that too. I think some of that is probably going to happen. I mean, don't have a crystal ball, but logic suggests that it will to a degree. The thing that gives me a little bit of comfort, I'm not saying I'm all the way there, but the thing that gives me a little bit of comfort is that we've got not only do we have the normal rules associated with governance oversight of a place that serves alcohol, which aren't nothing, but on top of that, now we've got a process with a revocable SUP, right? So if we don't meet the conditions of the SUP, they lose that ability, and all of a sudden they snap back to the default 45%. And the 3,000 foot item, I struggled with a little bit in the beginning, and I started to think about, well, what the protections that provides us from there being gigantic chunks of Mass Street turning into, I don't want to name any names, but there are some grandfathered properties that are fairly substantial that serve large numbers of people every weekend. This just enables a different kind of experience. I'm not trying to talk you into it. This is scary as I thought it through. And then I married that with the idea of I'm old enough to remember liquor by the drink and the games that you would play with club memberships and everything, how you got to that drink anyway. But when that went away, what that enabled in terms of the experience that we all now enjoy downtown, where you can go to a restaurant and have a glass of wine, and it didn't bring debauchery like some had feared that it would, but it really kind of elevated experience. Anyway.
But I wonder what would those criteria be in terms of if we look at these individually with an SUP each time? I mean, we don't have any idea what those criteria will be. I mean, why would we give this particular
90%,
item,
the other one not?
Yeah, and the other one not? What is it? A difference in floor plans, difference in location? We have no idea.
Do you think we can let the applicant weigh in on why he is unique? His is, would that be? Could you tell us why you would stand out differently than some, another bar?
Yeah, so like, why we would stand out differently than say like, another bar that might be under that square footage, but yeah, I mean, I guess like it's a thing that's really kind of hard to quantify, and that makes it like kind of like a difficult policy discussion is like, we all certainly understand and kind of like, kind of going through the minutia of in different ways. But I think the experience focused kind of part of what we do is something that you see throughout the country, right? Like in larger cities, there are, cocktail bars like what we do. And they truly do add something, I believe, very cool. Even if you're not so much into cocktails or spirits or any of that, it does provide a different type of experience and a different type of possibility for, especially folks who are older than say college age to like enjoy a night out with friends or what have you. I don't know how to quantify that. I would suspect that I don't totally understand the full process for what the special use permit might look like, of course, but I would have to think that there might be some way to differentiate that beyond just the square footage. We've talked about different things like and none of these like made much sense to us, but average drink price is not so much a good idea, of course. Like a limit on capacity, but that kind of isn't so much different from the square footage question in the first place. Hours of operation and all of that, but again, like kind of goes back to what kind of crowd are you serving and how do you measure that if that's something that you want to get into. And I don't know of many policies in the country that kind of delve into that side of things. But again, like has this establishment been in trouble with serving underage folks before? Like is like one like element of that could be a possibility. But yeah, we had also in the original proposal that we submitted, and again, like this was amended, and I think for the best. But we had included had been open for 5 years or more prior to being able to apply for this in the first place. That of course limits the possible applicant pool down to I think like just us in one other place that I'm aware of at this point in time. So the last thing that we wanted ever to do is to waste all of your time with like this long process that would just be like the John Brown like law. That was not our intention at all. And I think that the widening of it makes a lot of sense that Kyle and his team have done. But I don't totally know how like to quantify that. I mean, beyond like when you see it, I guess. But like yeah, it's a tough question for sure.
If I can kind of just maybe hopefully kind of get, I think where we're trying to go to, the key to keep in mind is all in the purpose statement of a special use permit. It is a discretionary permit that allows you to look at the use's operating characteristics, and as part of that review, see if it has a severe or a significant adverse impact on the surrounding uses or the community at large. So it does kind of lend itself to be that tool where you may see it appropriate in one instance, and given the context and the operational, it may be appropriate. You may not find that similarly in the second context if it does arise in the issue. So it gives you that ability to review the use, the context, and its operations in whole before recommending that up to the commission. And the key with that is it is a discretionary permit. It is in that purview and discretion. Maybe I hope that maybe helps clarify the question.
Commissioner Carter.
I think Jeff said more eloquently something I was going to say, which is, first of all, it's discretionary. It's not by right. Second of all, I mean, it's possible that commissions in the future will grant these SUPs to some degree that will become regrettable to someone who follows them. I mean, the downtown is always evolving. And to address Commissioner Carpenter's question, have we given up on downtown, or has downtown Lawrence given up on this principle? I would say, the changes that have been taking place in retail over the past 10 years or so, and we've heard a lot of talk of, in order for downtown to survive, it's got to focus more on experience than product, or more on experience than it has, and less on product than it has. No one goes to downtown Lawrence for a bargain. Usually, except on the sidewalk sale. They go there to experience it. They go there to, take part in the atmosphere. And it seems to me this is a very reasonable proposal to respond to those changing conditions. And I intend to support it.
If I may, I guess I still go back to the original intent of the alcohol ratio, if that's what it's called, 45 to 55. And there was a specific reason for doing that, is to maintain the character of downtown. I guess I just see this as a potential risk in that proposal was so that there would be mixed use activity in the core of the city. And I'm not sure that this helps that, making it a mixed use area. If there's a potential for this overturning this retail businesses into more bar-like atmosphere. And I know we do have some flexibility, given, as Commissioner Carpenter recommended or mentioned, that we did alter that the types of sales that could be included in that 45-55. So we've been flexible. The city's been flexible with alcohol serving establishments. So I guess I'm just not sold yet on. I understand the special use permit. And that it can be individualized, as each one comes up, the sitting planning commission can decide whether there's too many already, there's not enough, what kind of individual unique experiences there are. But it just, to me, flies in the face of what they were intending to do with that, with the alcohol ratio as initially proposed. And I'm wondering if this kind of discussion might be better as we go forward revising land development code.
I didn't hear the last part.
That if maybe this kind of discussion should happen in a larger venue in terms of the land development code update. I mean, there is nobody here to talk about this. Lawrence, downtown Lawrence isn't here. I mean, I think this should have a wider discussion again about what downtown should be. Like, we have a master plan coming up, and it just seems to me like this is a significant change.
Lawrence may have spoken.
Maybe.
Commissioner Montana.
Oh, Commissioner Munch, yes.
I was nodding my head, but I do have a question, because I am trying to conceptualize what 3,000 square feet looks like in a drinking establishment. So I guess the question for Mr. Colombo, what's the square footage for John Brown currently?
Yes, we are at, I believe, I should know this exactly, but I believe that we are at 2,400 square feet or thereabouts.
Got it.
So, yeah.
And was there any magic to the 3,000 figure, or was that just a nice round number that was above what you have?
In general, the 3,000 square foot number was kind of based on the general square footage as we found in other establishments around downtown that either fit the criteria that we were trying to avoid running into, or that would, on the inverse of that, be what we believe to be just in general an appropriate size for this as a potential rule. And so it really comes down to could the space be, in theory, a nightclub, or could it be could it become a massive open, cavernous, for lack of a better word, dance floor situation that would hearken to the kind of places that the law was intended to keep out in the first place, or at least to control in the first place. And we found that 3,000 square feet was a general, good rule of thumb for when that became even a little bit of a concern.
Sure, because I assume that in analyzing different sites, you can potentially see different bands of drinking establishments, different tiers throughout the community. That there are some that are more of your peers, and then there's a step up from that that's maybe of a different character, and then on beyond from that. I appreciate the input there. I guess I appreciate the general concerns about not wanting to change the character of downtown Lawrence and disrupts the great character and culture that has developed there over the years. But I'm inclined to support this application and I guess put our trust and faith in future planning commissions that they would use their discretion and good judgment to determine if this was always appropriate to allow a new business to exercise, it's have a different kind of establishment as a result of this.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to double check on the square footage number because I should know that, but it's been a long day.
Quite all right. That's helpful.
Wait, before you leave, let me ask about your liquor permit. I mean, you have to basically turn in a square foot, identify what every square foot in your business is used for before you can get your license.
Yes.
So when you meet all the requirements of the state to get your liquor license, how much room is actually left out of that, what did you say, 2,400?
I think, yeah.
How much space is
also
left for you to serve customers out of a space that size?
How many is the square footage that's left after
you meet the requirements for, the restrooms and the cleanup area and everything else that you have to meet to get your liquor license?
Great question. Okay. Our official capacity per the fire department is 81 inside. And we do have a parklet now, which has been really wonderful for us. I have health insurance now because of our parklet, which is great. But 81 inside and 40 outside is our current kind of like occupational limit. And on top of that, actually, this brings up a good point that I should have thought about earlier with regard to like how can you like differentiate places kind of like, based on something very concrete. We are not a bar and have never been a bar in the 6 years that I've been there. That has allowed standing room as part of its operation. It is seated only. It is seated table service only, and so that is like at the core, the very core of what we do. We treat it, very much like a restaurant experience would, in the sense that you are given a menu, and there is a server. There is all table service. There's no ordering from the bar. It is very much very in as much as a alcohol centered environment can be a controlled environment in that sense. 81 and butts and seats.
Thanks. That kind of gives an idea of how many people could be served at any one side.
And again, that is the fire department capacity. So like we don't seat 81 inside. Typically, the number is oftentimes closer to 60.
Thank you.
I think everything you said is accurate. I can't argue a single bit of it. And the concerns that you have, I think we need to address right. I think the risks that are there are right. I think the public process is important. And to each one of those things, though, I feel like we've had some measure of work towards that. So public process is an example. This came out of City Commission through public process with the applicant himself. It'll go back through the City Commission for another round of that. So I feel like the public, downtown, all those vested players who want to be there are going to have an opportunity. So I rest a little bit easier on that. Dealing with this inside of the code update, yes. But between now and then, there's a path that we have, I think, that can help enable something that is a benefit to Lawrence. And one of the reasons I'm inclined to support this is that I do want Mass Street to continue, that whole commercial district to continue to evolve. But as Commissioner Carter pointed out, the nature of retail, the nature of commerce has changed. And I think that by supporting this application, by supporting this change, we can enable unique environments, unique things to exist that right now can't. Right? We're saying no to something that's really unique, a boutique kind of experience. And I'm really curious to see what else might come from this. It would be special and wonderful as a part of how our Mass Street evolves. And so I'm excited about that. And if we don't allow it, if we clamp down on it for fear that it might be something negative, we'll never get there. So I get that there's risk. I personally think that there's more possible upside, and I feel comfortable that, again, liquor law, revocable SUPs, and size limitations are going to protect us. So because of that, I'm leaning towards support.
And I do anticipate that every applicant that comes before us for an SUP, comes before the commission, is going to be special and unique and boutique. And all those superlatives for every single SUP
I hope so.
that then.
Yeah.
So,
you've got a great point on the criteria for SUP, right? You've got a great point on that.
In correction to the square footage question, I did look it up. I was confusing. There is a space above us that we had previously been partnering with a restaurant that was part of our business model. And that 2,400 is their square footage. Ours is 1,877. So just to clarify, ours is like almost half of what we're proposing. So
I thought you might say it was 3,050 and then, oh.
A process question for staff. So if this text amendment were approved, does that somehow preclude changing it again with the discussion of the land development code?
No. No, well, we noted, we've had these conversations with the consultants and just kind of get a handle on how this works. If, the world's evolving and the code's still going to be going on there, they're tracking these along with us. So it does not preclude us from changing it as the code evolves. So if we see a different way that the code is responding or treating in different things, this does not set us in stone for that to be at that time.
Yeah, I'm sitting in a different position than I did a year ago in my knowledge of what's happening. And downtown, this business model, this establishment, and what we're talking about, this is not the problem. The problem is the cheap alcohol at the larger bars, which is contributing to a lot of issues downtown that everyone's struggling with. And it's just getting worse. So I don't know where it's going to go. But I guess that's to your point that about where are we going with even more alcohol downtown. Now this size isn't going to be the problem, especially at the price point that this is. That's not where we're getting our big problem, unless it's DUIs and even go home. But it's not the fights and the brawls which are going on constantly along Massachusetts. And I don't know what's contributed to that, but it is noticeably getting worse. And all of us have seen it, I'm sure. Drive by Einstein Bagels at about 5:45 in the morning, and it is just lined up with people in chairs and grocery carts and everything else. I mean, that's what downtown is becoming. And I don't know, late night drinking, I don't know what that does for it, but we have bigger problems. So I don't know where I am on this. I just know we might change it in a year. It might just go away when we do the new land development code. So that's where we are now. I think the city commission really needs to talk more about it. And I know just by judging what the conversation has been is we're probably going to have this pass. But I'm going to vote in a no. This setup, there are bigger issues. John Brown is not going to they're not the problem where they are, but the larger bars, which are outside of our regulations now, that's where we're having a problem. More shootings happen outside the larger venues that are outside of the current code. That's where we've had the problems. So I don't know how we address that.
So they don't have to follow the 45, 55.
Not if they were here before.
I see.
And they were. So that's, they're outside of this code right now.
Yeah.
And when we change the land development code, these rules will still apply to John Brown if this one passes.
Right.
Until they make significant changes that trigger the need to change. Everything's going to be grandfathered for a while, which is going to make the job of this commission even harder for a while.
Right.
I'm not sure where I am. I think I'm going to vote no just because this is a larger, it needs a larger discussion.
I think that's my point. And plus, I'm just very leery of in any way hurting or potentially allowing replacement of the very little retail that's struggling downtown. In some of the, in terms of those smaller little venues for retail, I want to give them the best chance possible for that mixed use downtown. So that's kind of where I am. So I know this is a very unique, interesting business, offers a unique boutique experience. But so will the next one and the next one. And I would like to see a larger discussion of downtown. And I'm afraid I just can't support it without that larger discussion. Code.
I have a question, just procedural question. I see that the city commission had initiated this amendment, but what exactly does that mean? Was that one commissioner said, look into this, or was there a vote that sent it to us? How did it land here?
So per code, when an applicant submits a text amendment, it is required to go to the city commission to initiate the amendment. So the city commission is not, they could decide not to initiate the amendment and then it doesn't move forward, but they've allowed the amendment to move forward to kind of have this conversation that we're having this evening. So anytime an applicant submits a text amendment, it goes to the city commission to be initiated.
Got it. So they were really just kickstarted the process. It's not that they had already had discussion or weighed in around this recently and then kicked it down to us. That's still coming, presumably.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, they really hope to get community input and discussion at the planning commission to help when it comes back to them to make a final decision or to make final tweaks to it. But we're not having that conversation tonight, except among ourselves.
Yes, so it's a great discussion to have. At least the city commission will look at this meeting, hear the discussion, and maybe at the city commission meeting, there will be public comment present, and there'll be more further discussion. So,
if I could just make a couple of observations. I think, I completely respect what the chair and Commissioner Carpenter are saying. I would also just observe, as in every one of these cases, we are also the public. We're a reasonably diverse group of folks in terms of where we live and our interaction with downtown. As a neighbor of downtown, I've lived 3 blocks from downtown for 22 years. This is something I'm supporting. My family spends probably a lot of money downtown. It's our first choice of retail. So my comment earlier was a little flippant, but it was not meant without affection. And one of the things I observed from a planning background and a community development background is that any neighborhood is an ecosystem that relies on people. And one of the things that also would cause downtown to lose its unique character is an increasing number of empty storefronts that attracts fewer and fewer people. And that I think this kind of measure, while as Commissioner Rexroad said, it can bring risk. It can also bring a reward by feeding that ecosystem. You think about the kinds of things you want to do on an evening. You can go to a movie. You can go out for drinks at an adult establishment and not have to go to as Commissioner Carpenter said, a place with cheap drinks in a big warehouse. You go to a used bookstore that we won't name. I mean, there are lots of things that you can do over the course of an evening, and I just think that this kind of measure potentially adds to that. So I support it despite the risk and without reservation.
Well, I would like just to mention if the applicant could maybe speak a little bit, what benefits will this change as percentage will bring to your business is something that I just haven't heard yet.
Yeah.
What do you think, or what, I don't want you to give me details about the business, but, what benefits do you see about going from, to 90%?
So your question is directed toward our business, not business in general. I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, that's a great question, and one that I could talk for a long time about. The percentage that is currently, or the one where we are beholden to, for lack of a better word, is again, like we understand why it is there, but this new percentage that we're proposing, or like with the help of y'all, would allow us to do what it is we actually have a passion for, and what we actually have knowledge in, and what we actually have, like experience doing it, and what we've been like refining our skills in, and have used our experience to be better and better, and like have turned into what I believe, to be in one of the best bars in the Midwest. And that's obviously I'm biased, but it's that all of that requires us having the space and the time and the focus to do what it is we love and what we do best, and to not need to then allocate, for instance, space and time and labor to meeting that other percentage, the requirements that meeting that other percentage would mean, if that makes sense. We as we've talked about, we have a very, very small space, and so any change beyond that 90%. To like what our requirements would entail would mean giving up a drastic amount of space and time and energy toward something that we don't frankly love to do. And that's not to speak ill on food or retail or anything like that. There are a number of incredible, obviously, restaurants downtown, and we believe that in a world where we would be required to do something that we are not good at, to do something that we are good at, we believe that in large part would be like not just a bummer for us, but like fairly insulting to those who do an incredible job downtown Lawrence at doing food or retail, whatever it might be, of which there are many. There are a number of incredible restaurants, and we believe that they are good at what they do for a reason, and we want to continue to do what it is that we do best, and continue to grow and continue to improve and be better, just like, I know that restaurants want to do and retail wants to do. If you, for instance, I don't know what all of your professions are, of course, but I would suspect that for those of you who are not in the restaurant business, if you, for some reason, were required to all of a sudden make 55% of your revenues from whatever you do from food, that you might not be so good at doing the thing that you actually do anymore, right? And that's, of course, that's kind of silly and hyperbolic, but like I think it gets the point across that, like, while yes, these are adjacent worlds, that it's not what we do, it's not what we're good at, and it's not, even though I love food, it's not what I love to do, it's not what my area of knowledge and expertise and care is in. So does that kind of help out?
It does. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And to real quick speak on, you made an incredible point, Commissioner Carter, about the vibrancy of downtown. It was mentioned earlier that someone said, I'm old enough to remember liquor by the drink. I'm old enough I grew up in Lawrence and I was born here. I'm old enough to remember when on Thursday nights, for instance, there was this kind of accepted general rule that retail and everywhere stayed open until 8 o'clock at least. And there was this kind of like lovely nighttime, sort of like, vibrant kind of atmosphere. And I remember like, going with my parents out, and we of course didn't stop in a bar, but we went to the Raven all the time. We went to Love Garden, and I would get to pick out a record if I was good that day. And we would go have dinner at La Paria when it was at its original location. All of that was like really fun. And for what I remember anyway. And I know that downtown is hurting. I know we all know that. And I know that there's not one solution that can fix all of that. But I and yes, of course, there are risks, of course, involved, and it may be naive to think this way, but I like to think that in a world where like places like us and permits can be handed out responsibly toward places like us, that it would increase the like population of lovely, responsible people who like are interested and excited about being out downtown. And I miss that about downtown Lawrence. And I know it's not all gone. Of course, it's still an incredible place to be. But I would like for there to be more reasons for people to go out. And I think that foot traffic in general, whether it's someone coming for whatever for retail or for a bar, foot traffic helps everybody. And I think that like that's something that is not talked about enough in the like parking discussion diaspora and the the general like fighting over parking spaces and like how much we are allocating certain spaces to certain like types of businesses. Like it's all great if we can if more people are there, right? If people are there, it increases everybody's, I don't know, possibilities for success and possibilities for being a viable business. And so with that said, I totally hear all the concerns that y'all put forth about, retail and like potentially cutting that off artificially to some extent. But I just want to say like that was a great point. And like I wanted to bring up the Thursday night thing because I really missed that. Yeah, hope we can get back to that.
Thank you. Other comments before I ask for a motion? Oh, can I have a motion then, please?
You want to?
Sure. I move that we forward the proposed amendment to the City of Lawrence Code, Chapter 20, to modify standards pertaining to eating and drinking establishments to the Lawrence City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
Have a second?
Second.
Rexroad. For discussion, I'll just say that despite the very eloquent arguments on either side of me and from the applicant, my vote will just be a signal that I'm very concerned about what's happening downtown, and I will vote no just out of concern and as a red flag that we really need to discuss this and how to bring back Thursday night, something like that, which I love dearly when it was around. So, call for the vote then. Thank you.
Commissioner Ashworth?
No.
Commissioner Barotto?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
No.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvar?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-2.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you for being here and hanging with us tonight.
Can I just say one thing? Our city commission chartered this group with looking into an issue that's big for Lawrence. And this group, with your leadership, did a very, very good job of talking that all the way through. Did come to consensus.
No, but I'm sure this will be listened to by the city commission. Hopefully they'll listen to our discussion and take that to heart. Thank you for being here and having patience. So we are at the end of our evening. Is there any consideration of other business before this body tonight? Nope. And then I ask for a motion to recess.
Can I just ask where we are with the update of the land development code? What's going on? As a member of the steering committee and being clueless as to where we are with all of this.
As his shadow and feeling the same.
Right now, the staff, or the consultants are working with staff, kind of going chapter by chapter, looking through the code and having those. And right now, make sure I get my right terminology correct here. They are working through what's called a code assessment. The old way of calling it would have been a diagnostic, going through the code, finding out what lies where, how does it connect, where does all the things go. So that code assessment takes quite a while because we've got 550 plus pages to dive through and get going on. So they are in that process at the moment. We're trying to figure out when that next steering committee meeting will be scheduled. It's not a standing meeting, so it's kind of in an ad hoc setup. I know we're talking in probably the next couple months to be getting that next meeting scheduled and on the books. And so they're doing a very deep dive. They're going through all the nuts and bolts and details to it. And it's just, we got a lot of code. And so it's going to take us a bit. But I would say you could probably see something in the next few months for schedule for that kickback to that kickoff coming back to the steering committee to have those conversations about what we heard in the first round and then also what that diagnostic is looking like as we proceed. So about more to come is the best way to put it.
Okay, can I have a move? Anybody want a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second?
Second?
You look reluctant to end the meeting there.
Right.
I want to keep going. Any discussion? Call for the vote then, please.
Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Barotto?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yeah.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvoir?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Very good.
That was